say fight back!
Hey, my new book, The Hidden History of the War on Voting, Who Stole Your Vote and How to Get It Back, is arriving in bookstores on February 10th. More information is available at all fine bookstores. I cover how the heartbeat of democracy depends on the vote. This book goes into depth on the racist legacy of our vote and the unique struggles of African Americans, women, and Native Americans. In part 2, there's a deep dive into the economic royalist modern war on voting. And part 3 is the solution section, how to get out there and get active. I'm also on the road to the book tour for The Hidden History of Voting. Join me on Monday, February 17th in San Francisco for the Berkeley Arts and Letters series, on Wednesday, February 19th at Town Hall, Seattle, Sunday, February 23rd for the Blue State Ball in Minneapolis, Friday, February 28th at Powell's in Portland, and Sunday, March 1st in Chicago. More information is available at thomhartmann.com. This book is the third in the series after The Hidden History of Guns and the Second Amendment and The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America. Our book today is How to Get Rid of a President by David Priess. And this is from the chapter Rejected by the Party, starting on page 12, kind of mid-chapter. Presidents need not be thrown out at the polls on election day to find themselves dislodged from the White House. History shows us that a chief executive's own political allies can remove that incumbent when they perceive him as unpopular or unfit. Refusing to nominate a president for a second term, or better yet, getting the incumbent to realize that he should walk away before it becomes an embarrassing vote at the convention, does bring the party significant pain. But many politicians have calculated that discarding their own party's toxic president by internal action is better than waiting for the voters to do it. This dynamic remained absent for the first half century or so of American politics. George Washington, who didn't represent any formal party, set a precedent by stepping away from re-election after 2 terms. Successor after successor followed suit, keeping the support of their parties until they left office after 8 years. Jefferson, Madison, Monroe, and Jackson lost the next election, both Adamses and Van Buren, or met the Grim Reaper, Harrison. John Tyler, if only in this one respect, was a trendsetter. He began a 6-president cascade of men who failed to appear on their party's ballot in the general election after their first term. One, Zachary Taylor, literally had no choice. Like Harrison, he died in office. The others, by staying alive through their 4-year terms, could have carried their party's banners again on Election Day. Not one did, as national agonizing over slavery and other tensions within each of the major parties made it difficult for any president to build and sustain a governing coalition. Of those 5 chief executives, only James Polk left with a solid reputation and a ledger of successes. He told Democrats upon his nomination in 1844, "I shall enter upon the discharge of the high and solemn duties of the office with the settled purpose of not being a candidate for re-election." And he stayed true to his word. It was just as well. Only 3 months after what would have been his second inauguration, he died at the age of 53. The 3 presidents who followed Polk, the forgettable series of Millard Fillmore, Franklin Pierce, and James Buchanan, shared 3 characteristics. First, historians routinely rank them among the nation's worst presidents. Second, and related to that, they took no responsibility for resolving the national moral failure of slavery. And third, no matter how they had attained office, they, like future presidents Chester Arthur and Lyndon Johnson, found themselves spurned by their own parties. The Whigs had learned in 1840 that a celebrity candidate seemed to have an easier route into the White House than a party regular. So in 1848, they nominated General Zachary Taylor, a recent hero of battlefields in the Mexican-American War. Despite his lack of solid political principles or any apparent passion for the job, just 2 years earlier he'd said with apparent sincerity, "I am not and never shall be an aspirant for that honor," Taylor won the election over Democratic candidate Lewis Cass. In July 1850, he became the second straight Whig general to president who couldn't make it to the next election alive. Vice President Millard Fillmore took his place. Fillmore had risen to prominence in New York's anti-Mason party dedicated to exposing and opposing Freemason fraternal organizations, but switched allegiance to the Whigs in the 1830s. In the first year and a half of the administration, inter-party rivals had manipulated Taylor better than Fillmore did, leaving him little to do but preside over the Senate and stew over his fate in a useless job. But as president, he was prepared to avenge perceived slights. Ahead of their expected dismissal, all the cabinet members whom Fillard had inherited from Taylor offered their resignations, which were quickly accepted by the new president. He asked them to remain in place for 1 month. They agreed to stay for 1 week. Fillmore would proceed to fire more previous political appointees than any of his successors had. More than half of those at the State Department, for example, had to find new jobs. The biggest development during Fillmore's presidency was the Compromise of 1850. This set of bills admitted California to the Union as a free state, allowed the organization of the Utah and New Mexico territories without reference to slavery, resolved both the Texas state boundary and the Lone Star State's remaining debt, abolished the slave trade in the District of Columbia, and reaffirmed the fugitive slave law that required the returning of slaves escaped across state lines. Fillmore signed each bill, believing this package of measures had fixed what he considered an annoying issue that kept getting in the way of his other priorities. The compromise bills delayed a war between the states, but at a cost. They not only perpetuated slavery, but split the Whigs further apart, as most Northerners refused to abide by the fugitive slave law. Congressional elections in November 1850 increased the Democratic opposition's majorities in both the House and the Senate. The rest of the president's term was so bad that the highlight might have been the start of Commodore Matthew Perry's voyage to Japan to open that country to American trade, even though he didn't arrive until Fillmore left office. Not long after rising to become the chief executive, Fillmore declared he wouldn't run again in the 1852 election. He reiterated that in 1851. But the trappings of presidential power and the pleas of his remaining party faithful convinced him to retract that pledge and make a late entry into the field of candidates. He portrayed his about-face as a noble personal sacrifice for the good of the party and the country. And during the spring of that election year, 8 Whig state conventions endorsed him. As delegates gathered for what a leading historian of the era calls the longest, most rancorous, and most debilitating Whig National Convention ever to meet, the first tally had Fillmore in the lead. How to get rid of a president.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Well, happy Wednesday. It's midweek here, and midday, in fact, at least in much of the country. And so it's time for Middays with Mark, Congressman Mark Pocan, the co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. He represents the 2nd District of Wisconsin. And in the U.S. House of Representatives, his website, pocan.house.gov. You can tweet him at Rep. Mark Pocan, is with us for the whole hour, taking your calls at 202-808-9925. Congressman Pocan, welcome back.
Oh, thanks, Tom. Glad to be here.
Thanks for joining us. I had two quick questions. Number one, I understand that a new voter suppression law went into effect in New Hampshire with this election, a Republican law that says that if students want to vote, they have to get a New Hampshire driver's license ultimately, or at the very least have to commit to register their cars in New Hampshire. And then secondly, I'd love your thoughts on what appears to me to be the death of American democracy. In 1780, John Adams and Sam Adams, not related to each other, worked together to write the Massachusetts Constitution. And in that Constitution, the preamble to that Constitution says, in the government of this Commonwealth, the executive shall never exercise legislative or judicial powers to the end that it may be a government of laws, not of men. And certainly inserting yourself in the sentencing of somebody is judicial power. I'm curious your thoughts on both those issues, sir.
Sure. So first, Tom, I just got to tell you, I was in New Hampshire this weekend, and I can't tell you how many people mentioned they listened to me on your program. So
that's great.
You have a big base in New Hampshire, and I had a number of conversations with really great people who are listeners. This issue, I know the ACLU currently is in lawsuit over this. They're essentially saying it's a poll tax for people. So it could have been something that had fewer students getting out to vote. And given that Bernie Sanders, for example, who was appealing to a lot of the young voters, that could have been, in a way, suppressing some of that new voter turnout that we've seen in Iowa and we expect to see in other places based on polling. So it didn't help, and it's just one more of these state laws trying to, pick voters as opposed to voters picking elected officials, like we've seen with things like photo ID in my home state of Wisconsin. That cost us about 41,000 votes back in 2016.
Yeah, it's mind-boggling. By the way, I sent you a copy of The Hidden History of the War on Voting. If you have it handy when we get off the air, look at page 92. I think you'll find it interesting. So, anyhow.
Okay, I have it actually in Wisconsin, but
okay.
I will.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, to Bill Barr and Donald Trump.
Yeah, this is just ridiculous. I mean, because of what the Senate did, the president now thinks he can get away with everything. So, fired Vindman, fired the ambassador to the European Union. Now he's going in and deciding to do sentencing and changing people's sentences. I mean, this is not what happens in a democracy. This is what happens when you have the leader of North Korea or Russia, and now this is the president again trying to look more like the people that he seems to admire so much, but is in direct opposition to what this country's been built on. So thank you, U.S. Senate. Your actions have empowered this president to continue to act like a monarchy or as a despot rather than as the democracy we are laid out by our Constitution.
Yeah, well, let's make it clear. Thank you, Republicans in the United States Senate, for selling out your country, and we mean that sarcastically, of course.
With an asterisk on Mitt Romney.
Yes, yeah, and a tip of the hat to Mitt Romney, who actually, I think the deciding thing for him was that oath. He had to swear before God that he would render impartial justice, and clearly he's the only Republican who actually believes in God. It's just mind-boggling.
It was, to watch what happened this is the start of more, I guarantee, Tom, that we're going to see of this president continuing now to abuse power because he thinks he can get away with it.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's pick up some phone calls here.
Sure.
Jared in Downington, Pennsylvania. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hello, Tom, and hello, Congressman Pocan. I want to call about what has to be done about the line.
Jared, you need to get your mouth closer to the microphone. It sounds like you're calling us from the bathroom.
Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Can you hear me now? Okay. I want to talk about what is to be done about the lying corporate mainstream media, which, as far as I'm concerned, is the largest enabler of Donald Trump, and the reason we have him, and I would argue the corporate Democrats running as well. Joe Biden or Pete Buttigieg or Amy Klobuchar should have no reason running at all. I mean, they have corporate funders. Joe Biden has voted for the Iraq War. And we have to do something about this stranglehold over the information going out to voters. But I'll hang up and let you answer.
Thank you, Jared.
Yeah, so, I mean, there's no question, 4 years ago, I think Donald Trump got made by free media day after day after day, and that helped him in the Republican primary. And conversely, right now, you would think that winning third place last night is what mattered, not winning a state. And so much of the spin that's out there about who can and who can't win is based on the political class and pundits who often are paid to have opinions rather than based on electoral results. So I agree with that portion, Jared. I do think everyone has a right to run, though, and we have a right to not vote for people that we don't agree with. But I do wish that, like last night was a classic example, someone won the state, and you think that would be the story, not necessarily who came in third. And then when they talk about why someone can't win, again, those are so often proved wrong. It does seem that there is a bent by much of the mainstream media to try to decide who the candidates are rather than letting voters do it through the primary and caucuses that we're having.
Yeah, amen. Denise in Calumet, Michigan, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hi, Congressman Pocan.
Hi, Denise.
Thank you for what you do. I'm worried about what Trump is up to with Social Security disability? I'm just going to leave it there. Do you know what's going on with it? He's threatening to cut it.
Yeah, so I'm trying to find the exact. So in his budget, there's some things that he has. He's trying to restructure and reduce federal disability benefits, including the Social Security's disability insurance program. So I think what we will be doing as Democrats in the House, and I serve on the Appropriations Committee, is we'll do our own version of the budget as we did last time. There's about a dozen appropriation bills. We will not have any cuts in programs, and that'll come out of the House. I can't speak for what the Senate will do, and I assume at the end of the day we'll probably have another omnibus sort of bill. But that's the president's wishes and desires through his budget. And where you really see someone's values isn't so much in their words, it's in where they put their money. And when they try to do things like the president's doing in his budget, it really shows where he values or more appropriately devalues people. And that's why I hope, just like you're raising this issue, more people look at what he's up to, because he wants to roll back parts of Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid. And those are programs that are some of the most popular and needed programs the federal government offers.
Yeah, I've got a list from Maria Teresa Kumar of, I believe she's with MSNBC. Medicare cut $850 billion, Medicaid cut $920 billion, Social Security cut $30 billion, food stamps cut $181 billion, education cut by 8%, HHS, Health and Human Services, by 9%, the EPA by 26%, the Interior Department, our national parks by 13%, and housing cut by 15%. And this is when the economy is supposed to be doing really, really good, and we're supposed to be able to pay for stuff.
But he's got some more money for the wall and for other projects that will never be approved by the House of Representatives.
Right, and somehow we've got to pay for his damn tax cuts. Joe in Woodstock, Illinois, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hi,
Joe? Yeah.
Congressman. Thank you for everything you do. And my question is this. Is there any talk of impeaching William Barr among your colleagues?
Yeah, Joe, I can't tell you about the committees that have direct jurisdiction because I haven't asked someone on those committees, but I think what just transpired this week certainly is adding to that conversation, and more people are having it. Whether or not I think there's bandwidth to try to do an impeachment, when we saw what the Senate just did with the president, we likely would have a similar result. Or what other actions can we do to try to gain more control back of the Department of Justice, so it's a Department of Justice and not just the personal lawyers of Donald Trump, which is really how they've been acting and behaving. So I'm sure there'll be more actions coming. I'm not sure if impeachment will be that action, given what we just saw with the president and the Senate, but I'm sure we're going to continue to find ways to try to curtail the way the Department of Justice is behaving.
A quick follow-up question to that as we're about to hit a break here. When Hillary Clinton was Secretary of State and Barack Obama was president, and Jim Jordan and all these guys in the House were investigating Benghazi and Hillary's emails, they would literally go from one investigation to the next, day to day to day to day. There was not a day that when there's something wasn't going on. Why has it been a couple of weeks since the impeachment vote, or is my sense of time distorted, that we haven't been seeing public hearings with Jerry Nadler or Adam Schiff? I mean, what's going on?
Yeah, I mean, I think they are preparing to do more of the work. I mean, no one has said that any of the 6 committees that have some of the oversight are stopping, whether it be emoluments clause, taxes, etc. It may just be that they're taking a bit of a momentary pause as far as the visible coverage from the media on it, but all those committees are still going to be active in that.
Good. That's reassuring.
Yeah.
Congressman Mark Pocan is taking your calls for the hour. It's Middays with Mark here on the Thom Hartmann Program. He's the co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. He represents the 2nd District of the great state of Wisconsin in the U.S. House of Representatives. Pocan.house.gov and Twitter, Rep. Mark Pocan.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Back with more of your calls for Congressman Pocan in just a moment. And welcome back. Anthony in Detroit watching us on YouTube. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hey, how you doing? It's good to talk to you. And while you were talking about the budget, isn't it funny how every year Trump's tried to zero out the Great Lakes Restoration Fund?
Yeah.
Crap. But anyway, that's a separate topic. What I called to say was I really wish that you guys would move to impeach again for the campaign finance and the emoluments, because I think you've already thrown the political Hail Mary with the first impeachment. So it's really not a loser to go at it again, especially since I think this corruption is much more straightforward than the whole Ukraine thing. The American people would understand it.
Yeah, I think this Senate's never going to do the right thing. I think we know that from what happened, not even allowing witnesses or documents to be entered into what they were supposedly doing to have a fair trial. Clearly it wasn't, and only one person had the independence to vote differently. So I think, for much of what we're trying to do is figure out how to continue to get information. The problem that we had in the House prior was that when the president doesn't allow people to come to a subpoena, it goes to the courts, and that can take not months but years to get resolved. And because of that, you'll never likely get some of the information you'd like to get before the election. So I think we're going to keep doing what we can. More information will come out through other maybe non-conventional channels, but we're not going to stop doing the investigations. But I don't know if you're going to see perhaps another impeachment process begin just because of the pure problem we had in the House before. If you can't get the information short of going to the courts can take months or years, more likely the years side. I don't know if you'll ever get the resolution you're trying to get prior to November.
Dave in North Canton, Ohio, watching us on Free Speech TV. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Yeah, hi. I would like to challenge the Congressman on the progressive agenda. Bernie wants to spend $30 trillion on Medicare for all. The Green New Deal costs another 30 or 40 trillion. So my question is, how are you going to pay for these costs without putting it on the credit card?
Sure. Well, Dave, first of all, you're right. I mean, putting it on the credit card like the Republicans did for their tax cut for the wealthiest so that, 86% of us are benefiting a few percent on top is an awful, terrible idea. Also, some of those numbers you have aren't real numbers. I know Fox likes to put them out as if they're real, but actually you're going to have savings ultimately in many areas on healthcare when you don't have administrative costs, advertising costs, marketing, et cetera. Go down the list that have been proven that are out there. So it's not necessarily that's the cost. There could ultimately be some savings in how we do it overall within the system. And some of it is investing in jobs through things on the Green New Deal that actually will bring in additional tax dollars and things. So I don't think it's as simple as saying the talking point from Fox, what something's going to cost, because there's investments as well, and there's other benefits you're going to see out of this. I think at the end of the day, what's the right thing to do? Is the right thing to do to make sure that health care is a universal right to everyone? I would say yes. Is the right thing to do to actually address climate change so we have a planet for our children and our children's children? I would say yes. And that's the values we have to have a debate about.
Well, the Koch brothers' own study found that, Bernie's program may cost $35 trillion, but we're spending $42 trillion right now over the next decade with this for-profit system.
Which ultimately brings you savings, right?
Yeah, exactly. So it's Medicare for all is cheaper. That's why every other country in the world does it. Okay, we'll be right back. Congressman Mark Pocan taking your calls for the hour. My new book, The Hidden History of the War on Voting, Who Stole Your Vote and How to Get It Back, is arriving in bookstores on February 10th. More information is available at all fine bookstores. I cover how the heartbeat of democracy depends on the vote. This book goes into depth on racism. Okay, welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Thank you, Joyce. Let's see here. David, we got to pot down the music. Thank you. Sean has the flu right now, Congressman, and so there will be a few hiccups here and there. Joyce is filling in, and she's doing a great job. She's just doing a spectacular job, but every now and then there'll be. Anyway, David in Woodland Hills. David in Woodland Hills, California, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Thank you, sir. If I may have 20 seconds. My question is, when are the Democrats going to start talking about the real reason Hillary Clinton lost and that's Republican voter suppression. Whenever I see a Democrat on the news ask that question, it's always, well, we didn't connect with the people, we didn't do this, we didn't. No. It is Republican voter suppression and theft and Russian involvement and James Comey, and we must shout this out and tell the people, make sure you're registered, make sure your state has voter rights, and make sure you're registered up until the end. When are you guys going to talk about this?
Yeah, well, David, I think we are, and I agree with the second half of what you said. We should convince people of all that. We should have voting laws that work. But I'll tell you my Wisconsin experience. We're a state that went just under 23,000 votes for Donald Trump, one of the three that people argue delivered the White House to Donald Trump. And we had a photo ID law put in place by our former governor, Scott Walker. Clearly voter suppression. The University of Wisconsin said it likely cost us 41,000 votes. Right there, if you look at 41,000 votes it cost us, if you assume a majority of those people would have voted Democratic, that could have been the difference. But, big asterisk, we had a 250,000 Democratic voter drop-off in the state. So we still had 200,000 people that weren't inspired enough to get out and vote. And by them not getting out to vote, there are many times what we needed to win the state. So I think it can be many different reasons. And I also agree that some of that was people staying home because of the ads the Russian bots put out there. Some of it was the candidate never came to my state. That certainly didn't help. So at the end of the day, it's about how you get more people out to vote because they agree with us on the issues. And I would argue you need a candidate who talks about the issues that resonates with people and they're honest about really wanting to do it. And that connection will win us the election.
Perry in New Orleans, Louisiana. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hi, Congressman. How are you doing today? This question does not have anything mostly to do with your topics. I want to find out why all these religious leaders are backing this corrupt that's going on in the White House. And I know you can't address it, but I'm concerned about that because then they're teaching one thing and they're saying something different. They're showing something different. And it just has to stop. And I am a Christian myself, and I believe in God. I believe in the Bible, but it's what they're doing is nothing pertaining to the Bible because they got children locked up in cages, you know. And I mean, he's cutting people on food stamps, Social Security, and all of that there just to profit the wealthy. I'm in a middle class neighborhood. I live a middle class life. And I don't think it's fair.
Thank you, Perry.
Yeah, Perry, and I think your position is shared by many people of faith, that the way they interpret the Bible certainly isn't the same as some of the so-called religious leaders who are backing Donald Trump. To be fair, on the ground, when I've talked to some people will talk about an imperfect man delivering the message, and I think they really believe that. But for many of the religious leaders, don't forget, these are folks who make a very profitable business and live in very nice homes and often have very nice corporate jets using religion as a business. And for many of them, as long as he's good on the issue of abortion, they'll forget everything else that clearly is a disconnect with their faith. And in some cases, again, it's more about ultimately how much they profit. So I respect more the people on the ground and their opinions, and we try to talk to them about the very values you brought up. I think people of faith should be voting against Donald Trump based on those values, but the so-called religious leaders may have other interests in mind.
Yeah, we have 15 seconds to the break. What's so astonishing to me is, Christianity Today comes out and says Trump is not being a Christian, and the Christians attack him. I don't get how these people can even wear this label. And
again, for many of them, they're political leaders who use Christianity as their vehicle, and many of them make money that...
I'm sorry, you got overwhelmed by the music there. We'll be back with Congressman Mark Pocan taking your calls on Middays with Mark here on the Thom Hartmann Program. Stick around.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Congressman Mark Pocan, the co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, taking your calls for the hour. More right after this. Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Proof of Conspiracy, How Trump's International Collusion is Threatening American Democracy by Seth Abramson. This is from the introduction. In late 2015, after Donald Trump has formally announced his candidacy for president, a geopolitical conspiracy emerges overseas, whose key participants are the leaders of Russia, Israel, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, and Egypt. These 6 men decide that Trump is the antidote to their ills. For Russia, U.S. sanctions. For Israel, the lack of Arab allies. For Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, and Egypt, perceived threats emanating from Iran. The conspirators commit themselves to doing whatever is necessary to ensure that Donald Trump is elected. Trump's presidential campaign is aware of and benefits from this conspiracy both before and after the 2016 election. On March 19, 2018, British journalist David Hurst, the former chief foreign leader writer for The Guardian, publishes the most important report of his career. Hurst, at one time the Moscow bureau chief at The Guardian, is now editor-in-chief of his own publishing venture, a London-based Middle East watchdog called the Middle East Eye. In the spring of 2018, he reports the existence of a years-long, continent-spanning conspiracy that will eventually envelop the President of the United States. The Red Sea Conspiracy. This book denominates the conspiracy Hurst uncovers as the Red Sea Conspiracy for the simple reason that it is hatched on a yacht in the middle of the Red Sea, a seawater inlet of the Indian Ocean bordered by, among other countries, Saudi Arabia and Egypt. One imagines that in his many years as a correspondent and commentator for The Scotsman, The Huffington Post, Al Jazeera, El Arabi, Al Jaid, TRT World, which is Turkish, Masr al-Aghan, Egypt, and The Guardian, Hurst never thought he'd stumble on a story as far-reaching in its implications as the Red Sea Conspiracy. But he did, and what he found could change the course of history. This book chronicles the events around the globe that preceded and followed the fall 2015 origin of the conspiracy, with a special focus on how the conspiracy prompted Donald Trump and his aides, allies, and associates to covertly collude with 6 countries, both before and after the 2016 presidential election: Russia, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Israel, Bahrain, and Egypt. Events that began on the Red Sea in 2015 now influence President Trump's foreign policy toward all of these countries, toward other countries not involved in the conspiracy, such as Qatar and Iran, and more broadly toward Europe, Asia, and the Middle East. The story of the Red Sea Conspiracy begins with a man named George Nader. As reported by Hurst in the Middle East Eye, toward the end of 2015, Nader, then an advisor to the Crown Prince of Abu Dhabi, Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan, known as MBZ, convened, with his patron's permission, a summit of some of the Middle East's most powerful leaders. Gathered on a boat in the Red Sea in the fall of 2015 were Mohammed bin Salman, known as MBS, Deputy Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, who would shortly become the heir apparent to the throne of the Saudi kingdom. MZB himself, by 2015 the de facto ruler of the United Arab Emirates. Abdel Fattah el-Sisi, the president of Egypt. Prince Salman bin Hamad, the Crown Prince of Bahrain. And King Abdullah II of Jordan. Nader, the improbable maestro of these rulers' clandestine get-together, intended the plan he posed to the men to include the nation of Libya, but no representative from that nation attended the gathering. Of the leaders aboard the yacht, 2, MBS and MBZ, are already close. According to a New Yorker interview with Richard A. Clarke, a counterterrorism advisor to Presidents Barack Obama and George W. Bush, MBS and MBZ, quote, talk on the phone all day to each other, end quote. The Red Sea meeting, although technically convened by Nader, is a means for MBZ to advance ambitions that he and MBS have designed together. The 2 Sunni Arab leaders' intention, Hurst records, is to remake the Middle East with the covert assistance of a highly placed American politician. They intend to do this by first renaming and reconstituting the membership of the 6-member Gulf Cooperation Council, the GCC, which in 2015 comprises Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Kuwait, Oman, and Qatar, while reorienting, too, its regional ambitions and global alliances. The proposed GCC realignment would evict Kuwait, Oman, and Qatar from the Council and replace these three countries with Egypt, Jordan, and Libya, thereby eliminating the entity's historical association with the Persian Gulf and remaking it as, instead, an alliance constituting, quote, an elite regional group of 6 countries which would supplant the GCC and form the nucleus of a coalition of pro-U.S. and pro-Israeli states in the Middle East, end quote. According to 2 sources briefed on the 2015 Red Sea Summit, quote, Nader said this group of states could become a force in the region that the United States government could depend on to counter the influence of Turkey and Iran, end quote. Prior to 2015, Turkey and Saudi Arabia had intermittently enjoyed strong diplomatic ties. The book Proof of Conspiracy by Seth Abramson. Hey, my new book, The Hidden History of the War on Voting, Who Stole Your Vote and How to Get It Back, is arriving in bookstores on February 10th. More information is available at all fine bookstores. I cover how the heartbeat of democracy depends on the vote. This book goes into depth on the racist legacy of our vote and the unique struggles of African Americans, women, and Native Americans. In part 2, there's a deep dive into the economic royalist modern war on voting. And part 3 is the solution section, how to get out there and get active. I'm also on the road to the book tour for The Hidden History of Voting. Join me on Monday, February 17th in San Francisco for the Berkeley Arts and Letters series, on Wednesday, February 19th at Town Hall, Seattle, Sunday, February 23rd for the Blue State Ball in Minneapolis, Friday, February 28th at Powell's in Portland, and Sunday, March 1st in Chicago. More information is available at thomhartmann.com. This book is the 3rd in the series after The Hidden History of Guns and the Second Amendment and The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America. All out at Thom. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and Congressman Mark Pocan is taking your calls for the hour. And it's Middays with Mark here on the Thom Hartmann Program. David in New Jersey, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hey, I talk to a lot of Republicans, especially at diners and whatnot. I just wanted to go through a quick list of how I think we should talk to them. Is that fair enough? I'll make it super quick.
Super quick, yeah. All right, well, let me rephrase that. Is this a question for the Congressman, David?
Yes. Okay. If you guys think that this is a great way to speak to, health insurance should be entrepreneurialism. For instance, it will create more small businesses because people can leave because of health insurance. Climate change, we're still getting dividends from the highways from Eisenhower and the New Deal construction of Roosevelt. Trade policy, if we got intellectual property wasn't such a big thing, American consumers would save money. And also, there should be something in trade policy for workers. We should insist that they pay the same wage as us. I concede to your thoughts.
Thank you.
Yeah. First time, just so you know, I saw a few people tweeting that they couldn't hear me for the last.
That was the last segment. I'm sorry.
No worries. I just wanted to mention it in case the people would follow. So to David's comments, I mean, I think there's a lot of different ways we can talk about these things. Let me answer it maybe a little differently. It's probably not going to be super direct to what you said, David, but let me answer it this way because I think it's important. Nancy Pelosi taught us when we came into Congress, and I've always thought this was a really good argument she makes, which is values unite, issues divide. So when you talk about everyone should have health care as a universal right in the country, I think the vast majority of people would agree with that. When you start getting to specific plans, sometimes the dotted I's and crossed T's is where you lose people. I think if we really talk around values of health care, values of a family supporting wage, values of having a climate that will allow us to have a planet for our children and our grandchildren, and investing in good green energy jobs, those sort of things are really the best way for us to be, I think, talking to folks and really appealing to. Those are issues that 60 to 80% of the people agree with us on. We just have to convince people, rightfully and honestly, that we mean it. I think that's the disconnect that happens. Bernie Sanders is authentic. He has said the same thing for 30, 40 years. Elizabeth Warren is authentic. I think when you look at some candidates and they talk nice but don't say a lot, that's when people get a little nervous, and I think that does affect turnout because they want to know that someone's actually looking out for them and their families. So I just think we need to be sincere and honest about the country faces some big issues. Fortunately, there's solutions that people agree with us on, and we can lead on those. That's the best way to talk about issues. And I'm not saying anything you said was wrong, David. I just think that there's a better way to say things more broadly.
Okay. Let's see here. Bradley in Idaho. Hey, Bradley, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hi, I have a two-part question.
Bradley, I need you to get your... We ask people not to use speakerphones because it sounds like crap. It sounds like you're calling for the toilet. Would you please either put the microphone right next to your mouth or take it off speakerphone?
Okay, is that better?
That is.
Okay, mine's a two-part. One, being we have a guy in our White House that has twice, not once, but twice, tried to tamper with elections. How do we know at the end of November that the election was real? Nobody interfered. And two, I agree with raising minimum wage. That's great. There's only one problem. A person like me that's under disability, which means I get a whole $783 a month to live off of. You raise minimum wage, everything else goes up, which means I pay for it because we don't get raises in Social Security like, a boss gets. We might get 0.5%. So when you raise minimum wage, they're going to pass everything back to the consumer. I already am 400, and the government says I'm 425% below the poverty level. I make the people on welfare look rich.
Thank you, Bradley.
So, Bradley, to your first question or point, we're going to have challenges from other countries, I think, because unfortunately the Senate has not taken up several of the measures to protect our elections. But I think in general, many of our states and local elected officials are going to run good elections. What we saw perhaps from Iowa is it's sometimes government is better running elections than political parties for that matter. But I still feel a confidence in how they're run. I think the question will be those outside influences, and we have to make sure that we're still trying to address that. We're still trying to get the Senate to give us some additional help on that. To the second part, this is kind of like the issue recently. Some unions have, I'm a union person, that's where my passions are worried that if you have a Medicare for All system or a universal health care system, that some of the benefits people have fought for, they won't be able to get anymore. I think it's a bad idea to try to, just because you're not getting the benefit, to take it away from everyone else. I think we need to lift everyone's boat. And in your case, we also have to correspondingly increase some of those other items that are assistance, and often they're tied to the consumer price index. So if there is an increase, which I don't think there'll be, and I'll explain that in a second, you will get some additional dollars that would be covered. But I think, and I've been a small business owner for 3 decades, now over 3 decades, when you raise minimum wage, you put more money into the economy in general, and that helps for people to be able to hire more workers and help stimulate and then get tax revenue from that. It does not mean things are just going to automatically increase, because everyone's business will also increase. And I just find there's a fallacy, I think, in the argument out there that if you raise people's wages, somehow you're going to price people out of something. That's not true, and I do think that is part of a broader conversation we need to have for more people like you, Bradley.
Amy in Amosville, Virginia. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hey, Ms. Phil, and thank you. My question is around, it's not really a question, more of a concern where, we're starting to see, how Trump is having his retribution and seeing how Bill Barr is basically watching his Twitter and doing whatever he wants. I'm curious to see, or if there's any thought about how this is going to start trickling down into other government agencies where, Trump says something and those government agency workers who might necessarily be pro-Trump start following his lead and just having rampant do whatever they want rather than follow the rule of law. Is there any concern or questions or thoughts about that? Has there been any discussion? Because I can see it happening. It looks like it's just starting the snowball going now.
Yeah, Amy, honestly, it's been happening for 3 years in many areas, not as brazenly as recently with the president. As he gets off on another thing, he does something a little more testing the limits. But Department of Labor has rolled back all sorts of protections for workers, and we're seeing that impact. The EPA has cut back on so much of what they're doing. This morning I talked to someone who works for the EPA. If you look at the number of inspections they've done and how much that's dropped, it's had a negative effect. We've now sped up lines for swine slaughter, where to the rate that we've cut back inspectors and sped up lines, that now our nation's pork may not be as safe anymore. There are so many things I could point to that he's been doing for the last 3 years, which is why it all points back to elections have consequences. There is a lot of power to the president through executive orders and other agency powers that the only way you curtail, honestly, is either you have a House and Senate working together, which we don't because of the Republican Senate, or you have a different person in the White House. So we just have to make sure that November really matters.
Paula in Tampa, Florida, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Yes, thank you, Congressman Pocan. I'm really concerned with what's going on in Nevada. They are handing out flyers, both in English and in Spanish, to the Culinary Union with Bernie Sanders' Medicare for All. These are scare tactics. Is there some way that we can counter this and hand out flyers both in English and Spanish about really what this all entails in Medicare for All?
Yeah, Paul, I briefly mentioned it. And thank you for asking it, because I think it is an important point. So some of the folks at the Culinary Union are passing out things saying that Bernie Sanders' Medicare for All plan would take away their health plan they got through their negotiated benefits. And while to the dotted I of the law that is true, it's not at all true in the spirit of what would happen. Because if everyone had health care, which everyone should, it's in the best interest of the country, those benefits that you gained for your health insurance can go to other benefits, whether it be retirement, whether it be time off, family leave, etc. Go down the list. You still can do that as a union, fight for that, because a union is valuable for any employee to be able to have a workplace, to stay in their workplace. But it's not that one thing saying, you're going to lose it if other people have health insurance. I just think that's a really terrible tact, and we need to think bigger and broader as unions on how we organize and what benefits we're fighting for. So you're right. Unfortunately, some people, I think, are just wrong on how they're describing this issue, and we need people to be able to give out information that explains it in a bigger, broader, more holistic sense,
So
and I think it would be helpful.
For example, if the Culinary Workers Union had negotiated a contract with the casinos that says that on top of wages, there's going to be another $10,000 per person per year that's going to go to United Healthcare or whatever to pay for a gold-plated health insurance policy, or say $15,000 or $20,000 a year would actually be one of the really high-quality policies. Well, under Medicare for All, the union now has $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 worth of bargaining power to go back to the employers and say, okay, you guys don't have to pay for our health care anymore, so please put this money into our retirement plans or into pensions.
Precisely, and it can go towards so many other things, from pensions to other types of benefits. That's a win for everybody, and then everyone has health insurance, and union members have even better benefits, as they should, for being workers and being part of a union.
There you go. 46 minutes past the hour, middays with Mark here on the Thom Hartmann Program. Congressman Mark Pocan taking your calls for the hour. He's the co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. He represents the 2nd District of Wisconsin. His website is pocan.house.gov, and you can tweet him at Rep. Mark Pocan,
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
And we will be right back with more of your calls for Congressman Pocan in just a moment. And welcome back. And Patrick in Champion, Michigan, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
That's me, Tom. Thank you, Tom, and thank you, Mark. I have a question. It's almost a silly question. I have a flyer from Bernie, and I'd like to donate, but they only list credit card information. I would like to send a check since I don't have a credit card. And would it be okay just to drop a check in the envelope?
I have no idea, Patrick. I'm sorry. I can't answer that question.
Yeah. Lowell in Salem, Oregon. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hi, Tom and Mark. I wanted to find out about how the Democratic Party can change the definition of affordable housing from its current 30% of gross income back to 25% of gross income. This was changed in the 1980s and has the net effect of papering over the lack of rising wages for workers. The benefit of changing this definition is that Republicans do not have a media campaign against this, and it will give back 5% of their income back to people with low income and on housing assistance.
Yeah, it's a good question, Lowell. I'm not familiar offhand with the difference on it. I know that you are seeing several major proposals put out there on affordable housing, and when the Democrats fully release our infrastructure package, there will be a very significant package around affordable housing and homelessness that Maxine Waters, as the chair of the Financial Services Committee, is working on, and that should be, I would think, in the next month or so, fully released. So I know that we're absolutely addressing affordable housing. Whether or not the 25 to 30% is in there, I don't know, because it hasn't been shown to us yet, but I will ask and try to get some more information on that.
Jim in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Good morning, Congressman Tom. My question is not if, but when Bernie wins the primary, will the Democratic Party come behind him, or will they try to do some shenanigans to what they pull because they've got this idea of socialism? Thank you.
Yeah, Jim, so I can tell you, Tom Perez yesterday, we had a closed-door meeting with the Progressive Caucus. He had asked for it for months ago. We finally had a chance to get together. He explicitly said, someone asked the question about there's someone who supposedly put an email out saying if Bernie wins, is there a way to change the superdelegate process or something? Outright, he said there's no way they're changing the rules. They changed the rules to take away superdelegates' votes in that first round, and they did all this, and they're not going to change it back. I trust him on that. And I can tell you from talking to more conservative Democratic members who said, look, Bernie's a nominee, I'm with Bernie. We just want to make sure we're beating Donald Trump. We understand the reality. So I think I don't have that problem. I'm not seeing it in something that if we just win these primaries and win the caucuses, that will make sure there is no fight at convention to have to worry about, period. So that's the best way to try to move forward. But I trust Tom Perez that whoever wins the nomination, there will be no shenanigans at the convention in Milwaukee based on how he promised that we won't change the rules the way they are.
Do you think he represents, I mean, does he have the power to enforce that, or can he be overruled by?
I've seen a bunch of other people's public comments to the same that are also in strategic committees on the DNC.
Yeah, I think they all know that if they blew it up, the damage to the party would be terrible.
Awful. It would be awful.
Yeah. There you go. Congressman Mark Pocan taking your calls for the hour. We'll be back with more of your calls for Congressman Pocan in just a moment. Pocan.house.gov and Rep. Mark Pocan is his Twitter handle. We'll be right back. Our free Hartmann Report podcast recaps the show every day. It's available wherever you find great podcasts. Hey, my new book, The Hidden History of the War on Voting, Who Stole Your Vote and How to Get It Back, is arriving in bookstores on February 10th. More information is available at all fine bookstores. I cover how the heartbeat of democracy depends on the vote. This book goes into depth on the racist legacy of our vote and the unique struggles of African Americans, women, and Native Americans. In part 2, there's a deep dive into the economic royalist modern war on voting. And part 3 is the solution section, how to get out there and get active. I'm also on the road to the book tour for The Hidden History of Voting. Join me on Monday, February 17th in San Francisco for the Berkeley Arts and Letters series, on Wednesday, February 19th at Town Hall, Seattle, Sunday, February 23rd for the Blue State Ball in Minneapolis, Friday, February 28th at Powell's in Portland, and Sunday, March 1st in Chicago. More information is available at thomhartmann.com. This book is the third in the series after The Hidden History of Guns and the Second Amendment and The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America. Back, Congressman Mark Pocan taking your calls for the hour. And Emmanuel in Chicago, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Thanks for taking my call, Tom. In terms of inspiring the black vote, especially the older black vote, I think Bernie Sanders would do himself a big favor if he would differentiate between his political stance, which is social democrat, and his economic stance, which is more like social capitalism, because the older black voter is scared of that word because of the past American situations with communism and the rest. And if you want to inspire him, I think he'd do himself a favor to make that distinction. Do you think he plans to?
Yeah, so Emmanuel, first of all, the good news is a poll just came out where Bernie Sanders is right now number one with voters of color. So his message is resonating, and that is important. And I think he got the majority of Latino votes even in Iowa when he ran, when he won with the most votes, at least in Iowa. I think the way that Ro Khanna explains it, I think, is a really good way. And I agree with him. I look at Bernie Sanders as an FDR Democrat, right? That's when we started some of the biggest, most important programs we have was under the presidency of Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and I think it's the same sort of principles under Bernie Sanders. Even Pete Buttigieg said, any candidate who wins a nomination is a socialist, right? They're going to say that no matter what, so we can't be afraid of a single word. We have to be willing to explain what the difference is, and I think if you really explain to people about health care and raising the minimum wage and the Green New Deal, they already have popular support in every poll. I think we'll be fine moving forward, but the good news is some recent polling shows Bernie is connecting with voters of color, and I think that is really important.
David in San Francisco, listening on AM 910. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Oh, thanks, Tom and Congressman. Yeah, there's some news that came out in the Atlantic Monthly as well as Politico the other day about the next year's effort by the Trump campaign to basically divide and conquer us all. And they have this thing that they're going to spend $1 billion on what they're calling the Death Star. And it's kind of a recreation of what CIA did to break apart the Soviet Union, that they would find the old Hatfield and McCoy kind of enmities in the Soviet bloc and just play them against each other day after day after day after day after day. And so the Soviet bloc was kind of broken apart by these internecine wars. So apparently with the internet and social networking, people are giving out so much of their personal information that they're also giving out potential internecine warfare,
So, David, I'm sorry, we just have a minute left in the hour.
Well, I'm just wondering if there are campaign laws that would basically force a company. This Death Star is probably set up as a corporation. I'm wondering if their corporate charter could be yanked and their assets seized.
Congressman.
David, I can't answer that directly. What I can say is, we've seen this same tactic from what the Russian bots did. Clearly, it seemed like there was some, if not direct coordination, certainly indirect coordination between the Trump campaign when he would say, get me those emails and things like that. We're going to have a lot to fight this year. So we have to have more unity than disunity. And I think that's just something coming back from a couple weeks in Iowa and New Hampshire. No matter who the Democratic nominee is, if you don't want Donald Trump, we're going to have to get unified, but I think the way you win is by talking to voters about issues they care about, and I hope every candidate starts doing that.
Yeah, and we need to get ready for the onslaught. In the last 15 seconds here, thoughts on this coming week?
Well, this is a week, at least in the House, we're going to be back in district, so again, it's a great chance to try to get a hold of your member of Congress, have your voices heard. Surprise billing is something to watch for coming up. It's a pretty big battle, and private equity firms and others are involved, so you can imagine how it's going to turn out.
Great.
We need to fight hard.
Congressman Pocan, thanks so much for being with us today.
Yeah, thank you, Tom, as always.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
And my apologies to you and to our listeners for the burp we had in the first half hour where we missed part of your comments. Thank you. Thank you so much. We'll be back with more of the program. We'll continue our conversations here in just a moment, hitting the top of the hour.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
Hey, my new book, The Hidden History of the War on Voting, Who Stole Your Vote and How to Get It Back, is arriving in bookstores on February 10th. More information is available at all fine bookstores. I cover how the heartbeat of democracy depends on the vote. This book goes into depth on the racist legacy of our vote and the unique struggles of African Americans, women, and Native Americans. In part 2, there's a deep dive into the economic royalist modern war on voting. And part 3 is the solution section, how to get out there and get active. I'm also on the road to the book tour for The Hidden History of Voting. Join me on Monday, February 17th in San Francisco for the Berkeley Arts and Letters series. On Wednesday, February 19th at Town Hall, Seattle. Sunday, February 23rd for the Blue State Ball in Minneapolis. Friday, February 28th at Powell's in Portland. And Sunday, March 1st in Chicago. More information is available at thomhartmann.com. This book is the third in the series after The Hidden History of Guns and the Second Amendment and The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America. Today from Guns for Hire, how the CIA and U.S. Army recruit mercenaries for white Rhodesia. It's a historical reprint of what appears to be a 1979 pamphlet, basically. This is from the introduction. It does have an ISBN number. It is available in book sources. In Zimbabwe, Rhodesia, actually this must have been published post-1980 because they're referencing Zimbabwe. In Zimbabwe, Rhodesia, 270,000 white settlers, mostly immigrated since World War II, controlled the government and economy, ruling over the 7 million black Africans. The Zimbabweans cannot vote. They have been forced off the bulk of the arable land, and they have no democratic rights whatsoever. All labor performance in Zimbabwe is black labor, and it is intensely exploited, often at less than subsistence wages. Zimbabweans have been fighting European invaders since the early 17th century. Since the 1890s, they have been directly ruled by Europeans, at first in the form of a private British corporation, the British South Africa Company. Since 1923, direct political rule has been in the hands of the white settlers, currently led by Ian Smith and his fascist Rhodesian Front Party. It's important to note that the white settlers were originally given this direct local power as a, quote, self-governing colony of the British government, thereby creating a master-caretaker relationship. During these past 80-odd years, Western imperialism, the multinational corporations of the United States, Britain, and South Africa, has extracted huge profits from the exploited and oppressed Zimbabwean population via the subsidiaries of the Anglo-Americans, Lonrho, Amex, AMAX, Union Carbide, Mobil, ITT, and other corporations. They fully intend to continue doing so as long as they can. The white settler minority has been rewarded for their violent subjugation of the Zimbabwean people with perhaps the highest national standard of living in the world. Sir Roy Walensky, the former Prime Minister of the Central African Federation, which included what is now Rhodesia, once said, "This man Smith has an appeal. It's the appeal of an easy life. For $6,000 a year, you can have 5 servants, a swimming pool, and a lot." Beginning during the early 1960s, however, the Zimbabwean nationalist forces under the leadership of the Zimbabwe African National Union, ZANU, evolved the strategy of guerrilla war to liberate their people and land. It is proving to be very successful. There are 20,000 guerrillas in base camps in Tanzania and Mozambique, over 3,000 in Zimbabwe itself, and this number is continually rising. In a meeting between Stephen Solars, a U.S. congressman, and the ZANU guerrilla leaders, they were reported to reject the possibility of enlisting the assistance of Cuban or other foreign troops, declaring that if we cannot liberate ourselves, we do not deserve to be liberated. Despite Western propaganda to the effect that the U.S. and British only wish to avoid a bloodshed in Rhodesia, don't forget the Zimbabweans have been bleeding for almost a century, their real fear is that the liberation struggle will win. With this victory in sight, it is not surprising that the counterattack by the Smith regime has become more vicious and brutal. Actually, this must have been published pre-1980 because this is when Smith was still in power in Rhodesia. More than 250,000 rural Zimbabweans have been forced into concentration camps. Terrorist raids have been conducted against Zimbabwean refugees in Mozambique. Dusk to dawn shoot-on-sight curfews have been instituted and enforced in the border areas. And escalating counterinsurgency attacks have been launched against the military arm of the liberation struggle, the Zimbabwean People's Army, ZIPA. It is crucial for Westerners to understand that the Smith regime has not stood alone in this barbaric campaign. This pamphlet documents the critically important element in U.S. imperialism's support for the Smith regime, white mercenary reinforcements for the fascist Rhodesian, quote, security forces. This flow of U.S. mercenaries to prop up white Rhodesia is an important, though secret, part of U.S. imperialism's strategy for Africa. The U.S. has massive investments in southern Africa. Zimbabwe alone supplies the bulk of high-grade chrome ore used in the U.S. for jet engines and other advanced technological items. Coal, copper, and other minerals are ripped out of Zimbabwe for U.S. industry. Mobil Oil, Texaco, Hertz Rent-A-Cars, Holiday Inns, and many other U.S. corporations operate illegally in Rhodesia through foreign subsidiaries. More important still is South Africa, the fortress of U.S. interests in Africa, where $1.5 billion is invested by GM, IBM, Ford, and other giant multinational corporations. The liberation of Zimbabwe would, for the first time, penetrate the buffer zone of satellite countries protecting the borders of South Africa. South African guerrilla fighters, who are already training by the thousands in camps in Tanzania and Zambia, would have direct access to re-enter their land and accelerate the liberation struggle. Knowing that the stakes are high, U.S. imperialism has worked to strengthen the white supremacist outposts in Africa, although at times this had to be done covertly. In 1970, the Nixon White House approved Henry Kissinger's Operation Tar Baby strategy, based on Option 2 of the Secret National Security Study Memorandum Number 39. This strategy essentially called for covert military assistance, including direct exchanges, so the South African troops could be trained in the U.S. in specialized tactics and weapons. This would be done while the U.S. tried to convince Africans that it was on their side. This is from the pamphlet number 39, that Kissinger memorandum. We would maintain public opposition to racial oppression, but relax political isolation and economic restrictions without openly taking a position undermining the United Kingdom and the UN on Rhodesia. We would be more flexible in our attitudes toward the Smith regime. And it goes on from there. Guns for hire.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
By Thom Hartmann.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
You know, there are times when I think that the only two people in the media, I said this a couple of days ago, I'll say it again, the only two people in the media who are taking seriously what Donald Trump is up to are me and Bill Maher, talking about how it appears increasingly that we're not just like heading in the direction of fascism or tin potism or the end of democracy or whatever phrase you want to use to describe it, but we're there. I mean, Donald Trump has officially ended one of the most important parts of the American experiment by demanding that an independent Department of Justice go easy on one of his buddies, specifically Roger Stone, one of the guys who's got the goods on him. Roger Stone could testify about things that would put Donald Trump in jail. Probably going all the way back to the 1980s when they first became good buddies. Back in 1780, John Adams, who was, moved on. Now this, keep in mind, this is 9 years before the United States was created as the country we know it. This is back right after the Revolutionary War when we were operating under the Articles of Confederation. John Adams, who ultimately became our second president, and Samuel Adams, whose bar in Massachusetts, and they're not related to each other, by the way, whose bar in Massachusetts was like the epicenter for the Boston Tea Party and for the organizing, in the wake of the Boston Massacre and the shot heard around the world, all this stuff. Major revolutionaries. These two guys helped draft the Constitution for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. And that Constitution says, and I quote, "In the government of this Commonwealth, the executive," in other words, the governor in this case, but if you were to apply this to federal government, it would be the president, "the executive shall never exercise the legislative or judicial powers." In other words, the president or the governor cannot make laws, cannot pass laws, cannot rule in judgment of other people, and cannot insert himself into the punishment of people who have been adjudicated guilty, to the end that it may be a government of laws and not of men. In other words, our goal here in creating the Commonwealth of Massachusetts is to create a government of laws, not men. And now that I've kind of broken that up with explanations, let me just read it real quick. In the government of this Commonwealth, the executive shall never exercise the legislative or judicial powers to the end that it may be a government of laws and not of men. By taking the judicial powers of convicting and sentencing, Donald Trump has turned our system of laws, not men, on its head. I mean, this is the sort of thing you'd expect to see in Erdogan's Turkey, in El-Sisi's Egypt, in Bolsonaro's Brazil, in Putin's Russia, in Duterte's the Philippines, in Xi's China, in Kim Jong-un's North Korea, for God's sake. But you literally, I defy you to give me one example of any advanced democracy in the world where the prime minister has come out and second-guessed the courts and directed the courts, or the prosecutorial system associated with the courts, their equivalent of the Department of Justice, the prosecutors, to change what they're doing because it affects a friend of his. We are supposed to be a government of laws, not men. I don't know how unambiguous that can be. And if nothing else, I think this is a breathtaking indictment of our education system since Ronald Reagan took a meat axe to our public schools back in the 1980s and ended, mandatory civics lessons. A lot of people who went through public schools since the 1980s aren't even familiar with that phrase, a government of laws, not men. I learned that in 3rd or 4th grade, back when we were memorizing the preamble to the Constitution and parts of the Declaration of Independence and Lincoln's Gettysburg Address. I mean, 8, 9, 10 years old. But of course, that was a long time ago. Bill Barr and Donald Trump have now committed a complete repudiation of the most important of the values and structures that actually made this country a democratic republic. And I don't know how we can continue to call ourselves a constitutionally limited representative democratic republic when in a republic, I mean, the functional definition of a republic is that the rule of law is paramount and that institutions that enforce the rule of law are independent of politics. 4 brave federal prosecutors stood up to this and resigned. But if there's not an overwhelming and systematic response to this, to Trump's subversion of the American criminal justice system, our republic is at an end. November could be too late. I mean, here you've got Trump. He tweeted this morning, "Congratulations to Attorney General Bill Barr for taking charge of a case that was totally out of control and perhaps should not even have been brought. Evidence now clearly shows that the Mueller scam was improperly brought and tainted. Even Bob Mueller lied to Congress." That's Donald Trump. Congratulations to Bill Barr. This is the political president inserting himself into the Department of Justice, and he's basically admitting, confirming for all of us, that Bill Barr personally intervened in this Roger Stone case. The DOJ has been saying, "Oh, no, it wasn't improper political influence. It wasn't Barr, it wasn't Trump. We just decided to do it. After we said Roger Stone should get 7 to 9 years, we thought about it overnight." Well, it turns out that 4 of the prosecutors, this is Aaron Zelinsky, Adam Jed, Jonathan Kravis, and Michael Mirando, 4 American heroes, learned that their recommended 7 to 9 years was being overturned in this case, in Roger Stone's criminal case. They learned about this by watching Fox News. No, the DOJ never told them. No, it wasn't their decision. They learned about it by watching Fox News. Trump had tweeted the night before, "This is a horrible and very unfair situation. The real crimes were on the other side. As nothing happens to them, cannot allow this miscarriage of justice." And then yesterday, the reporter said, "Well, did you blow this up?" He says, "I've not been involved at all." That would be a horrible aberration. These are, I guess, the same Mueller people that put everybody through hell, and I think it was a disgrace. They ought to be ashamed of themselves. And then last night on Twitter, he says, the prosecutors cut and ran after being exposed for recommending a ridiculous 9-year prison sentence to a man that got caught up in an investigation that was illegal, the Mueller scam. One of these 4 prosecutors has resigned entirely, presumably going to go into private practice. The other 3 have said, take us off this case. We cannot stay on this case in good conscience. In classic Democratic style, Chuck Schumer, instead of going, on TV and going, "This is treason," which of course is what, Doug Collins or Jim Jordan would be doing, came out and very politely held a news conference saying, "This situation has all the indicia of improper political interference in a criminal prosecution." Right, that's going to really crank up the folks. David Loffman, who is a former Justice Department official, was a little more explicit. He said, "This is shocking, a crammed down political intervention. We are now truly at a break glass in case of fire moment at the Justice Department." Amen. We are. And then on top of that, Trump fires Vindman, which is against the law, by the way. Punishing people who tell the truth, punishing whistleblowers is against the law. Vindman followed the law. He was given a lawful congressional subpoena, and he showed up and testified. Trump firing him is against the law. Firing his brother for being related to him, massively against the law. But you probably haven't heard about Elaine McCusker. Elaine McCusker worked for the Department of Defense. She was up for a significant promotion. She was going to be the comptroller and chief financial officer for the entire Pentagon. So she was like the chief official in handling Pentagon money, or one of them. And this order from Mick Mulvaney, who is not only Trump's chief of staff, but also the head of the Office of Management and Budget, which administers funds appropriated by Congress for things like Ukraine, weapons. Mick Mulvaney said, don't pass that money on to Ukraine. Now, the Pentagon is the agency that's supposed to actually pass the money out in the form of weapons, in this case. And she's at the Pentagon. And so she contacts OMB in email and says, what's going on here? And she said, in fact, I quote, "We need to continue to give the White House as much decision space as possible, but I'm concerned that we have not officially documented the fact that we cannot promise full execution. That is, we can't deliver the weapons now because of what Mick Mulvaney just said at this point." In other words, she did the right thing. She cited the law. She said, "I'm concerned about this. Can you please explain this?" And OMB just basically BS'd her. Mick Mulvaney, let's just dance around this. Let's pretend it's not going on. And now, the emails are out there. You can see this. This woman followed the law. Trump has pulled her nomination. She's losing her job, in fact, because she followed the law. Now, she's not a high-profile person. She hasn't testified in front of anybody, so you probably haven't heard her name. But this is just another example of a lawless administration that this goes way beyond just being lawless. This is like pouring acid on the structure, corrosive acid on the structure of our republic. Ben Franklin said, "It's a republic, ma'am, if you can keep it." We are not keeping it right now. Anyhow, my rant for the day. I've got more coming up, but we'll pick up some of your phone calls and get into more of the news today, too, as we continue. Curious also your thoughts on last night's primary in New Hampshire. What does this all mean? Stick around. We'll be right back. It's 18 minutes past the hour.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
We'll be right back. And welcome back. Gretchen in Felton, California. Hey, Gretchen, what's up? Gretchen is on phone system 1? No Gretchen? Okay. I'll put Gretchen back on hold and Lise can figure out what's going on. Let's see here. Sandy in Anglica, New York. Hey, Sandy, what's on your mind today?
Okay. Hi, Tom.
Hi,
How
Sandy.
are you?
Good. What's up?
This is Sandy Shellis, known in your chat room as Environmental Coffee House. And I'm shouting out to your YouTube chat.
Cool.
But I've been waiting, and I know this is kind of changing the subject. On the budget, I was watching PBS this morning, all the going back and forth on this Trump 21 budget. My question, or let's ponder this, is the Social Security disability cuts.
Mm-hmm.
They are supposed to be phased in, over 10 years? Now, will this affect people currently on this, on disability? Will this preclude? It will.
Yes.
Will it preclude future people who become disabled from even being able to have access to
my understanding, Sandy, of the nature of these cuts is that this is classic. This is how they got. This is starting with the Clinton changes, the block granting. Well, it wasn't just Clinton; it was Newt Gingrich really, and Clinton went along with it. For welfare programs, and you see state after state doing this now with Medicaid. The red states anyway. Blue states are not.
Yeah.
And what they're doing is right now, if you're disabled and you succeed in getting on Social Security disability, which because of literally 15, 20 years of cuts in Social Security staff now can take up to 2 years just because there's so many fewer people there. Right now, once you get on disability, depending on the kind of disability and how severely disabled and whether it's temporary or permanent, basically periodically you have to recertify yourself. You have to prove once again to the Social Security Administration that you still are disabled and therefore deserving of these benefits. But it's in reasonable periods of time. I mean, and I don't know what they are, but I would guess if, for example, you're blind,
2 years.
It's many years, and if you strained your back or something, it might be every year or something like that. So what they're going to do is they're going to radically increase the number of times you've got to go back to the Social Security Administration and prove that you're still disabled. Now, this is problematic for a couple of reasons. Number one, some people will simply get lost in the shuffle, and that's what they're counting on. That's why they say it's going to reduce the expenses. It's because people aren't. They're just. Yes. And number two, you're going to have people having to wait to get recertified and losing their benefits, and then having to kind of start at the beginning of the line. I mean, basically, they're just screwing with us, or screwing with people who are disabled.
Disability programs, the private long-term disability programs in the United States, also do this.
Yeah.
You get accepted, and then they arbitrarily and capriciously kick you off. They surveil you, and this is not comp. This is disability companies, these big insurers that make billions of dollars in profit. They surveil you, and I'm wondering now, is the government going to start doing that for disabled people?
It wouldn't surprise me. Back in the 90s when I got my private detective license, the guy that was teaching me how to do it and was kind of my mentor, I did that because I was writing a novel about private detectives. Mostly what he did was track down people who were on corporate disability, but who were going golfing and things. So yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. Sandy, thank you for the call. And frankly, it was very rare that we nailed somebody, or that he nailed somebody. We'll be back. It's 22 minutes past the hour. Our free Hartmann Report podcast recaps the show every day. It's available wherever you find great podcasts. Hey, my new book, The Hidden History of the War on Voting, Who Stole Your Vote and How to Get It Back, is arriving in bookstores on February 10th. More information is available at all fine bookstores. I cover how the heartbeat of democracy depends on the vote. This book goes into depth on the racist legacy of our vote and the unique struggles of African Americans, women, and Native Americans. In part 2, there's a deep dive into the economic royalist modern war on voting. And part 3 is the solution section, how to get out there and get active. I'm also on the road to the book tour for the Hidden History of Voting. Join me on Monday, February 17th in San Francisco for the Berkeley Arts and Letters series, on Wednesday, February 19th at Town Hall, Seattle, Sunday, February 23rd for the Blue State Ball in Minneapolis, Friday, February 28th at Powell's in Portland, and Sunday, March 1st in Chicago. More information is available at thomhartmann.com. This book is the third in the series after The Hidden History of Guns and the Second Amendment and The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America. And welcome back. So, I've got a few other rants here about trade and a few other things. I think I'll move most of those into the next hour. I know that there's a lot of people with questions and comments, and so we'll pick up some of your calls here. Gretchen in Felton, California. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, you're on the air, Gretchen. What's up?
Good morning. I just want to start by saying that I believe that health care should be a right and not a privilege. Mm-hmm. But that being said, I'm also concerned about the quality of our health care once we eliminate competition from the equation.
Wait a minute. Nobody is talking about eliminating competition in the healthcare industry. The only industry where they're talking about eliminating competition is the health insurance industry, which is merely a banking industry. Your insurance company does not take your temperature or prescribe drugs to you. Everything will remain the same. Your doctor will still be your doctor. He or she can run their own private practice or be part of a hospital. The hospitals will compete with each other. The drug companies will compete with each other. What's going to happen is instead of having 7 or 8 major and a whole bunch of minor companies taking your money, skimming profit off the top, paying their chief executives as much as $1 billion like United Healthcare did, and then paying your bills, your money is going to go to the government, and the government will pay your bills, which is how it works in Canada. It's how it works in most European countries. We're not talking about doing what the United Kingdom did, which is genuine socialized medicine, which is where the government buys and runs the hospitals. All the doctors work for the government. Nobody is talking about that, including Bernie Sanders.
Okay, well, that's good. I feel like those are some of the details that people don't understand. Mm-hmm. And that's where some of the hesitance comes in.
I think you're absolutely right. And what we're really talking about is getting the bankers out of healthcare. You know, it's very straightforward. There is a hospital, and I'm forgive me for not remembering the names of these hospitals. I did this story on this show a year or two ago, and it was just a shocking story. There's a hospital in New York, as I recall, it's like Albert Einstein Hospital or something, and there's an almost identical sized hospital in Toronto, Canada. And, you know, same number of beds, same number of floors, you know, basic same services. The one in New York has an entire floor with 200 people on it who process billing. The one in Canada has one office with 4 people in it who process billing. All the saved money from that, you know, 196 people who aren't processing billing in Canada goes to providing better patient care. That's what we'll get when you get the health insurance companies out of the business. Gretchen, I got to run, but thank you for the call. And that was an excellent question. Thank you so much. And thank you for holding to do it. It's 27 minutes past the hour. We'll be back with more of your calls in just a moment. It's the Thom Hartmann Program, defending America from the weapons of mass deception.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
It's the place where smart people get their news. Back with your calls right after this. Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Beyond the Valley, How Innovators Around the World Are Overcoming Inequality and Creating the Technologies of Tomorrow by Ramesh Srinivasan. This is from the introduction. Sergio, a friend of mine from Argentina, recently completed a trip around the world. I met him last year in southern Mexico, where I'd been visiting regularly since 2016 to learn from indigenous communities who have been creating their own digital networks. My visits there were inspired by my too long decade fascination with the internet and digital technology's rapid development. First as an engineer and later as an educator and researcher, exploring how digital technologies impact the lives of diverse cultures and societies. Sergio had not traveled extensively outside of his country before. When we met at a food vendor's table on a street in Oaxaca, he was buzzing with the excitement of having visited 5 continents and holding various jobs as a carpenter and farmer, for instance, or in the service industry at hotels and restaurants in just the past year. When I asked him about his range of experiences in parts of the world so different from where he grew up in working-class Buenos Aires, he made an offhand remark that stopped me in my tracks. Regardless of where you go, he said, people get pushed into the internet. That is what they want. After we parted ways, Sergio's comments stayed with me. I was struck by the contrasting but intertwined images it contained. The first being of people thrust into some alternative universe that exists beyond our screens. The second being of people who relate to the internet as a place where we share common ground. Like many of us, Sergio had the perspective of a user, simultaneously awed but also perplexed by the characteristic pushiness in which websites, mobile apps, virtual reality headsets, and a myriad of other digital devices have appeared and made their way into our lives. I wrote this book as a way to explore how we, the billions of internet users, can respond to the sea change that transformed an open world of online possibilities into something else altogether, a digital landscape of walled gardens and predetermined paths already programmed for us, for which we have little visibility and or control. If we're going to turn over our lives to these devices and systems, shouldn't we at the minimum have power over how they're designed and profited from? Shouldn't technology be people-centered, not in use and addiction, but in creation and application? As access to the internet and cell phones expands around the world, so too does the power and wealth of but a very few technology companies located on the west coast of the United States and in China. These companies offer services that have, without question, created value for their billions of users, providing efficient and economical ways for us to find and disseminate information, telecommute to our jobs, socialize with one another, and buy and sell goods. Many of us love the cheap prices on Amazon and how quickly the products we purchase arrive at our doorstep. Others believe that things like surveillance cameras, GPS tracking of people using smartphones, and the use of shared data to apprehend terrorists provide great value. But we may not also recognize that in the process we give up our individual rights to privacy, put our most vulnerable members of society at risk, threaten the viability of small businesses, and contribute to greater economic inequality and political division. In domesticating the wild west of the internet, the big tech companies have provided a vibrant market of beneficial tools and services for users and amassed unimaginable wealth for their executives and stockholders. But in the process, they have also supplanted the open democratic internet with a vast network of privately owned architecture. Imagine digital fences, highways, roads, bridges, and walls, whose sole purpose is to control people's movement through digital space in ways that benefit their company's bottom line. Clinging to this idea of an open internet obscures the reality. The digital world is structured by static, hefty, and inflexible digital architectures. And like invisible borders, they enforce specific paths. We are increasingly aware, of course, that the phones and websites linking us to a wider world keep track of us, even when we're not using them, and that our personal data is vulnerable to covert collection and monetization. We have also experienced the amplification and rapid spread of propaganda, misinformation, and hate speech on the internet, too often with tragic results, all of which distract us from facts, contexts, and multiple points of view. Meanwhile, journalists, activists, scholars, and more of the public are raising concerns that Chinese, Western, and white male interests dominate the content and systems that power the internet, rather than those who reflect the full diversity of all of us who are online. Finally, against the backdrop of profound economic inequality around the world, we have seen how the expansion of the gig economy has made work, wages, and benefits less secure than ever before, even as digital automation threatens to eliminate much of the current job market. I, like so many of us, derive incredible value from the services and products provided by Amazon, Google, Apple, Microsoft, and Facebook. But I also know that I've agreed to their terms of service without understanding exactly what I have given up in exchange for what I am getting. I am not being given the means to think through the downstream implications of my actions, even for myself, much less for others in my networks. As an example, Amazon has made it so inexpensive and easy to buy almost anything that almost all of us use the site regularly. The Chinese Alibaba is no different. But is it okay that both these companies have monopolistically overtaken an open marketplace? The book is Beyond the Valley by Ramesh Srinivasan. Hey, my new book, The Hidden History of the War on Voting, Who Stole Your Vote and How to Get It Back, is arriving in bookstores on February 10th. More information is available at all fine bookstores. I cover how the heartbeat of democracy depends on the vote. This book goes into depth on the racist legacy of our vote and the unique struggles of African Americans, women, and Native Americans. In part 2, there's a deep dive into the economic royalist modern war on voting. And part 3 is the solution section, how to get out there and get active. I'm also on the road to the book tour for The Hidden History of Voting. Join me on Monday, February 17th in San Francisco for the Berkeley Arts and Letters series, on Wednesday, February 19th at Town Hall, Seattle, Sunday, February 23rd for the Blue State Ball in Minneapolis, Friday, February 28th at Powell's in Portland, and Sunday, March 1st in Chicago. More information is available at thomhartmann.com. This book is the third in the series after The Hidden History of Guns and the Second Amendment and The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America. Welcome back. There we go. Thom Hartmann here with you, and Michael in Stockholm, Sweden. Hey, Michael, what's up? Thanks for watching us on YouTube.
Hey, Professor. Thank you so much. Yes, I was thinking here that your president has put himself in a vulnerable position, as many leaders have done, and the only way to survive is to stay in power. And I don't think that your president is a person that is capable of cutting his losses early, and I think he would rather, take everybody down with him rather than simply stop. And as you have said, Professor, when Trump realized he will not win the election and that he will probably spend the rest of his life in court, knowing how this man thinks that he will start a war and declare a state of emergency and postpone the elections. Mm-hmm. So I'm thinking here, if he could postpone the elections for years and years, and I suppose the election for the Senate will also be postponed, right?
Yeah. Yes. Federal elections. Yes.
And so then he got the same Republicans that he has control over to avoid impeachment, and he will probably continue to substitute high-ranking military officers, and that brings me to John here, that if Trump thinks he will lose, and if nobody and you and others believe that it's probably a big probability that he will never let go of power, then one could argue, maybe a bit stupidly from my side, that the Democrats should not focus on who has the best chance to beat Trump, but rather send someone like John Delaney, who I think was the only one who was losing against Trump in the average polls, and just hope that he turned it around on election day rather than have no election at all and have this man be president for life and bring down the entire free world.
I understand what you're saying, Michael. I think, though, that the wild card in this race is not going to be, the Democrats trying to throw a double jiu-jitsu move at Donald Trump. I think it's going to be Michael Bloomberg. And I don't know how this is going to play out, but we've got a guy who's worth 60 or 80 billion dollars. Just the money that he has sitting around is generating $2 billion a year in interest. He could spend $2 billion on a campaign and literally not notice it. His net worth would not go down a penny. And because of the 1976 Buckley versus Vallejo Supreme Court decision, in that Supreme Court decision, they said that if you are financing your own campaign, in other words, this was a pure oligarch move. If you are financing your own campaign, you don't have to pay attention to any of the campaign finance laws because it's your own money. And that's free speech. And so we'll see what happens. I mean, I was fascinated last night. I don't know if you could catch MSNBC from Sweden, but Joyanne Reid last night, who I have a lot of respect for, and does a great program on the weekends on MSNBC, was talking about how she's talking to friends of hers in the African American community who are saying, you know, if Joe Biden's going down, our choice number 2 is Michael Bloomberg, and it's not because he was a great guy, with stop and frisk. He of course has walked that back since then, but it's because he has the best chance of beating Trump because he's a fellow billionaire and he's willing to spend his own money and he's willing to spend whatever it takes, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And he probably would pick somebody like maybe Amy Klobuchar, a so-called moderate Democrat who has some visibility and is either a woman or a minority as his running mate. And I think that could, I mean, we won't know for about 4 weeks, I guess, until after Super Tuesday and a few other major primary elections. But he's going to show up in those elections. He didn't show up in Iowa or New Hampshire. He wasn't even on the ballot. So anyhow, that's what I think is going to happen in terms of.
Yeah, I understand, but I think I wasn't maybe clear enough. What I meant was that Trump will probably postpone the election if he sees that he's losing in the polls,
right?
And he is losing against Mayor Bloomberg.
No, I got your point that he would not postpone the election if he thought he was going up against a guy who he could certainly beat. But here's the problem: if you put in somebody like John Delaney, who Trump definitely would beat. I mean, he was on this program. It was pathetic. And not to say he's pathetic, but as a candidate for president of the United States, it was Casper Milquetoast. And if we put up a candidate like that, Trump then wins the election, and then he says, "I, Claudius, now I've won the election." I mean, look at what happened in 35 when Hitler won his first real election. I mean, that was the end of the Republic, of the Weimar Republic. I mean, that was when everything changed. Now, I'm probably off by a year on the year, but it's like once he has won re-election, I believe that Donald Trump is going to go. He's going to go full. Pick an example, right? Erdogan, declare martial law, lock down the government, start imprisoning his enemies, controlling the internet, controlling the media. Imprisoning journalists and reporters who, like myself, who have spoken out against him. I think all of that is actually possible. Now, I realize people will say that I'm an alarmist for saying that. And as I said earlier, I think Bill Maher and I are the only two people in the American media who are talking like this. But I'm guessing that more and more are going to start. And Michael, your country, confronted this in the 1930s. And it's a truly concerning situation. I'll give you the last word, and then I got to move along.
Thank you. And I hope that doesn't happen, but if it happens, then you and Louise are very welcome to Sweden.
Well, thank you, Michael.
I think you will find great peace here.
I've been there many times. It's a wonderful, wonderful country, and I particularly love Stockholm, which is where you live. So thank you for the call, and thanks again for watching us on YouTube. Chris in Sonoma, California. Hey, Chris, thanks for listening to AM 910. What's up?
Yeah, in the second hour for about 12 minutes, you touched on what I thought was the number one topic of the day, and it's very patient after 3 years, hoping justice would prevail. But when you talked about Schumer coming out and sort of just finger painting this is the biggest challenge. This is the destruction of our democratic republic. And I used to think it was in its infancy stage, but it's past the toddler phase now.
Yes.
And if we don't have recourse other than some kind of, and I'm a patient guy, other than extreme measures, what is going to happen to stop this guy before he destroys the country? I mean, we have you talked about rights. There's callers that talk about healthcare rights and voter rights and all these things. They are going to be a moot point.
Yes.
If this continues, where is the opposition to it, and how do these enablers in the Republican Senate? That was the last check. That was the significant check that could have stopped them.
And go back and look at the history.
Tom, you are not an alarmist. You are not an alarmist.
Thank you. Go back and look at the history of Mussolini's Italy in the late 1920s, early 30s. Go back and look at the history of Franco's Spain. For that matter, in the modern era, Look at Duterte's takeover of the Philippines, and now he's flirting with the Chinese and talking about not renewing his, the United States being an ally, essentially a military ally. Look at what happened in Egypt with El-Sisi, and once he was challenged, he declared a crackdown, as did Erdogan in Turkey. This is huge. This is breathtaking. There are not enough superlative adjectives, excuse me, I'm fighting the flu here. There are not enough superlative adjectives to describe what is going on right now. And Chris, thank you. Thank you for validating my concern, shall we say. I almost said hysteria, but I really don't think it's hysteria. Thank you very much. Mike in Brooklyn, New York. Hey, Mike, what's up?
All right, I'm following these other guys are saying the same thing. What I'm saying is, what balance, what check do we have against this Constitution that we cannot defend it because we have no army to defend the Constitution?
Right.
If the president goes against us.
Well, our last hope, frankly, because I don't believe that the Democrats in the House of Representatives are going to re-impeach Donald Trump, and I'm not seeing the kinds of aggressive investigations coming out of them that we saw coming out of Republicans when they thought that Hillary Clinton had committed the crime of the century by having a private email server, just like George W. Bush had, just like Alberto Gonzales had, just like Dick Cheney had. But in any case, I'm not seeing this, and it concerns me tremendously. And I think that an invigorated, outspoken, activated populace is really the only thing we have right now. And, our last hope is going to be in 8-9 months down the road when it comes time to the election in November. Because I'm
just saying we have to define this guy's order. Anything he says, we got to define it and stay in the true land.
Yeah, they need to go after him. Mike, thanks for the call. They need to absolutely be going after him in Congress today. We'll be back. It's 45 minutes past the hour.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Back with more of your calls and the news of the day in just a moment. It's the Thom Hartmann Program, the place where despair is not an option. And welcome back. Steve, watching Free Speech TV in Bloomington, Indiana. Hey, Steve, what's up?
Hey, Tom. Thank you for taking my call. Sure. Can you hear me okay?
Just fine. What's on your mind, Steve?
When we used to talk about the caging of children, it worked politically well for us. It sparked in many ways, it sparked in many people a visceral nerve that spoke to the heart of many Americans, including some Republicans, maybe even my Republican father, even though he won't talk about that. I'm willing to bet that you too, Tom, had some problems with your Republican father.
Oh, I did. We fought like dogs and cats when I was a teenager. But what's your point or question that you're making, Steve?
So why not talk about cases of needless death? Palestinians. Okay, 62 dead, 13 of which were children. Immediately, we don't know what's going on now. Right. Thousands which were injured, and we have 173 dead from a commercial airliner that was shot down recently in Iran. This all happened because of Trump. And
well,
so
I wouldn't say exclusively because of Trump, but he's certainly promoting it. Yeah.
Yeah. So why do we not become? Why do we not talk about this? Let's become ugly about it.
I think the question, Steve, is where is our humanity? And it has been papered over by the profit motive in our corporate media, which is all the more the tragedy. And people continue to die in ICE custody, and there's virtually no discussion of it. Occasionally, it pops up on Daily Kos. Gabe Ortiz does some really great reporting on this, but that's pretty much it. And I think until we have to confront the issue of the fundamental lack of humanity in this administration. And we've had a lot of opportunities to do it. And again, the Democrats give nice speeches and protest it loudly. We need to go to war over this, not literal, not shooting war, but, what was the old phrase that I think Nixon used about his war on drugs, the moral equivalent of war. But the time is now. And it's not just the children in cages and the kids dying in ICE custody and the horrible trauma that's being inflicted and the children who've been sold into trafficking and whatnot by this administration. It's not just that. It's also the tens of thousands of people who die every year because they don't have access to health care because Republican states won't expand Medicaid. It's also the people who are not able to make it on Social Security because Republicans for decades have fought any increases in the cost of living and tied the cost of living adjustments to silly measures that have nothing to do with the lifestyle of people who are on Social Security. It's just, it just goes on and on and on. It's people in the workplace. Donald Trump is dialing back workplace protections for safety. It's people who are getting cancer because there's poison being dumped in their water, and he just allowed more poison to go into our water. There's more poison in our food supply. He's authorized 60 or 70 new pesticides new ones, old ones that have been banned because they cause neurological disorders and cancer, and now they're going to be in our food supply starting next year. That's what we've got. Our free Hartmann Report podcast recaps the show every day. It's available wherever you find great podcasts. Hey, my new book, The Hidden History of the War on Voting, Who Stole Your Vote and How to Get It Back, is arriving in bookstores on February 10th. More information is available at all fine bookstores. I cover how the heartbeat of democracy depends on the vote. This book goes into depth on the racist legacy of our vote and the unique struggles of African Americans, women, and Native Americans. In part 2, there's a deep dive into the economic royalist modern war on voting. And part 3 is the solution section, how to get out there and get active. I'm also on the road to the book tour for The Hidden History of Voting. Join me on Monday, February 17th in San Francisco for the Berkeley Arts and Letters series, on Wednesday, February 19th at Town Hall, Seattle, Sunday, February 23rd for the Blue State Ball in Minneapolis, Friday, February 28th at Powell's in Portland, and Sunday, March 1st in Chicago. More information is available at thomhartmann.com. This book is the third in the series after The Hidden History of Guns and the Second Amendment and The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And Mary in Evanston, Illinois. Hey, Mary, what's on your mind today?
I am very upset about the fact that the orange president opens his mouth and Barr says, how high should I jump? And now Stone is going to go free with no jail time, and that 4 attorneys have quit. And how long, if this man wins again, if it even takes this long, he will be going after everybody and anybody who has spoken out against him, including people like me, and you're done.
Yeah, I agree. That's why I said, he's going to go after people in the media and start putting people in jail, just like John Adams did. I mean, we don't need to go back to John Adams. Let's, just like Erdogan does, just like Duterte does, just like, journalists are being assassinated in these countries.
Yes, and we have 2 now who have to have round-the-clock protection because of his minions threatening them.
Yeah.
And
it's actually more than 2.
Oh, I only know 2, thank God. But there is no there. I called all my I live in Illinois. As you know, I called my senators and my congressmen, and I said, look, you need to get on every media possible. You have to stop. You need to do something. You just can't sit there and be polite.
Right. I agree. I absolutely agree, Mary. I don't know how to say it with any greater urgency. I've shouted it. I've complained about it. I've talked about it. And I've been talking about it for actually for for years in a little more abstract context, but now that we are literally watching this happen right in front of us, and it is criminal. It is absolutely criminal. So yeah, I'm with you.
It is just I believed that we were stronger than that until this Barr thing just happened.
Mary, you said you would lose your job as a result of Trump. What, if you don't mind my asking?
Oh, I mean, he's going to go after me. He's going to go after me.
Because of your...
Because I speak up against him. I speak up against him. I call him. I send him emails. Oh, yeah, I'm not quiet.
Yeah. And, and your Facebook page will become the locus of it's...
That's right.
They're putting, I guarantee you, they're putting together an enemies list. And this is, IBM helped Hitler do this, compile lists of the Jews. And everybody thought, it's not going to be a big deal. Boy, was it a big deal. Mary, thank you for the call. Kathy in Marlboro, New Jersey. Kathy, what's on your mind?
Yes, good morning. Good afternoon, Professor. How are you?
I am well. How are you, Kathy?
Yes, I'm trying not to make this long. I was listening to Rachel Meadows, I think it was last Thursday or Friday, and she was doing the same exact thing that you're saying today. But I think, if I'm not mistaken, because I listen to you all the time, that you had talked about this, a few times, a few weeks ago, talking about how this country is turning into a Russia. And, the DOJ with Barr, that's under Trump's control. And all the other departments that are under DOJ, the FBI, ICE, NSA, DEA, all the agencies that are under them. But she was especially talking about the NSA on this report last week. And she was saying, and I think you had mentioned this a while ago, that the NSA is supposed to send reports to Congress. Mm-hmm.
And both the NSA and the CIA, they have stopped doing it. And they're refusing to testify to Congress. They were supposed to testify, I believe it was either last week or this week.
Exactly.
And they just said, no, we're not going to come. Sorry. And then you had the spectacle of what's her name, Gina Haspel, the director of the CIA, who was the director of the torture operation, who covered up the torture, by the way. Her reward for that was being made head of the CIA. Her standing up and applauding at the State of the Union, when traditionally the law enforcement agencies are supposed to sit quietly, just like the members of the Supreme Court, and say we're above politics.
Yeah, at the end of her report, she was saying, because Congress is going back and forth with the NSA about the reports and this and that. Right. And the last thing that the NSA had information that she was getting was that they would send a report after the elections. What is that all about?
Yeah, well, that
is absolutely crazy.
It's called a stall.
We know why it's happening, but
yeah, it's a stall. It's a stall, and probably it means that the report would not reflect well on Donald Trump, and so therefore we'll wait until after the elections.
Right.
We are confronting a crisis that, you look back at the history of this country, the Civil War was a terrible crisis. People didn't know if the Republic would survive. I think we are confronting a crisis right now. While there's not as much bloodshed at the moment, nothing even close. We've got white supremacists out there, the FBI now saying that white supremacists represent the same threat that ISIS does to Americans.
Exactly, I heard that report.
Yeah, and we've got a serious crisis here. And this administration is sitting around, they're very fine people, and no, we're not going to do anything about it. And no, we're not going to, and they're refusing to give the FBI, they're refusing to declare international terrorist groups, white supremacist terrorist groups, groups affiliated with, Anders Breivik, the murderer in Norway, or the guy down in Christchurch, New Zealand, I'm forgetting his name, Stephen somebody or other, who shot up all those people. These guys are part of an international ring, and the government, our administration, the Trump administration, will not give the FBI the tools to even track them. It's insane. Kathy, thank you for the call. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
We say fight back!
book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Mind Blank, Cambridge Analytica, and the Plot to Break America by Christopher Wiley. My life now looks, this is from the Revelations chapter, next to the last chapter. My life now looks like that of a paranoid man, but after being assaulted in the street, receiving threats from rogue private security firms, having my hotel room broken into late at night as I was sleeping, and experiencing 2 hacking attempts on my email in the past 12 months, it's only sensible to be cautious. When I had my flat checked for security risks, the TV was deemed a risk, as it could be used to watch or listen to me without my ever knowing. As we dismantled it, I smiled at the irony of a TV that watches you. In the days leading up to the story's publication, when Facebook began sending me legal threats and escalated my case up to its deputy general counsel and vice president, my lawyers realized that the company saw my whistleblowing as a major threat to its business. Having experience on other hacking cases, my lawyers knew what companies backed into a corner were willing to do. But Facebook was different. They did not need to hack me. They could simply track me everywhere because of the apps on my phone, where I was, who my contacts were, who I was meeting. I disposed of my phone, and my lawyers bought new clean phones that have never touched Facebook, Instagram, or WhatsApp. The terms and conditions of Facebook's mobile app ask for microphone and camera access. Although the company is at pains to deny pulling user audio data for targeted advertising, there is nonetheless a technical permission sitting on our phones that allows access to audio capabilities. And I was not an average user. I was the company's biggest reputational threat at the time. At least in theory, audio could be activated, and my lawyers were concerned that the company could listen in on my conversations with them or with the police. Facebook already had access to my photos and my camera, which put them in a position to not just listen to me, but also to see where I was. Even if I was alone in the bathroom taking a shower, I wasn't ever really alone. If my phone was there, so was Facebook. There was no escape. But getting rid of my phone wasn't going to be enough. My mom, dad, and sisters all had to remove Facebook, Instagram, and WhatsApp from their phones for the same reason. But Facebook also knew who all my friends were. They knew where they liked to go out, what we wrote about in messages, and they knew where we all lived. Even hanging out with my friends became a risk, as Facebook had access to their phones. If a friend took a photo, Facebook could access it. And in facial recognition algorithms could, at least in theory, detect my face in the photos sitting on other people's phones, even if they were strangers to me. As I was getting rid of my old electronics, my friends joked that it was as if I was exorcising the demons inside the machines. And one friend even brought over some sage to burn, just in case. A funny gesture, of course, but in a way it really was an exorcism. We now live in a world where there are invisible spirits made of code and data that have the power to watch us, listen to us, and think about us. And I wanted these specters gone from my life. On March 16, 2018, a day before The Guardian and The New York Times published my story, Facebook announced that it was banning me, not only from Facebook, but also Instagram. Facebook had refused to ban white supremacists, neo-Nazis, and other armies of hate, but it had chosen to ban me. The company demanded that I hand over my phone and personal computer and said that the only way for me to be reinstated was, in effect, to give them the same information I was providing the authorities. Facebook behaved as if it were a nation state rather than a company. The firm did not seem to understand that I was not the subject of investigation. They were. My lawyers advised me to refuse their demands so as not to interfere with a lawful police and regulatory investigation. Later, when I was working with the authorities, the ban made it far more difficult to hand over evidence that was sitting on my Facebook account, and the investigation into what happened during the Brexit referendum suffered as a result. They say you appreciate something only when it's gone, and it was only when I was erased from Facebook that I truly realized how frequently my life touched their platform. Several of my phone's apps stopped working, a dating app, a taxi app, a messaging app, because they used Facebook authentication. Subscriptions and accounts I had on websites failed for the same reason. People often talk about a dualism, the cyber world and our real lives. But after having most of my digital identity confiscated, I can tell you that they are not separate. When you are erased from social media, you lose touch with people. I stopped getting invited to parties, not intentionally, but because those invites also happened on Facebook or were posted on Instagram. Friends who did not have my new phone number found it nearly impossible to get a hold of me, except for trying to send an email to my lawyers. When I got through the thick of the whistleblowing, it would only be in coincidental encounters at clubs or bars that I would make contact with people I had not seen in months. And now when guys on dating apps ask to check out my Instagram profile, it starts an awkward explanation of how I was banned and that I'm not catfishing, I promise. It's as if my identity has been confiscated and people no longer believe I am who I say I am. Sometimes I get recognized as that guy, and people worry that someone might start watching them if they decide to meet me. I always tell them that they needn't worry because these companies are already tracking them 24/7. This ban was nothing more than a dick move by Facebook, and it felt like trolling by frightened bullies. For me, it created at most an annoying personal hassle and was not nearly as consequential to my life as the kinds of retaliation that other whistleblowers have experienced, not to mention the degree of damage to modern society that the platform has already aided and abetted. But it showed me just how integral my online identity had become to so many facets of my life. The book by Christopher Wiley. Hey, my new book, The Hidden History of the War on Voting, Who Stole Your Vote and How to Get It Back, is arriving in bookstores on February 10th. More information is available at all fine bookstores. I cover how the heartbeat of democracy depends on the vote. This book goes into depth on the racist legacy of our vote and the unique struggles of African Americans, women, and Native Americans. In part 2, there's a deep dive into the economic royalist modern war on voting. And part 3 is the solution section, how to get out there and get active. I'm also on the road to the book tour for The Hidden History of Voting. Join me on Monday, February 17th in San Francisco for the Berkeley Arts and Letters series, on Wednesday, February 19th at Town Hall, Seattle, Sunday, February 23rd for the Blue State Ball in Minneapolis, Friday, February 28th at Powell's in Portland, and Sunday, March 1st in Chicago. More information is available at thomhartmann.com. This book is the third in the series after The Hidden History of Guns and the Second Amendment and The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. I just got a report in the mail from the probably another program that Donald Trump will shut down. This is from SIGAR, which is the, I used to know it. It's the special something on Afghanistan reconstruction. It's an agent. It's out of the military. In fact, it's mail.mil is the URL. And today, SIGAR released its latest special projects work, the human cost of reconstruction in Afghanistan. Now, this is coming from our military. It's coming out of the Department of Defense. I'm on their media list. And the report is believed to be the first official counting by an independent inspector general. Yeah, SIG is Special Inspector General. That's what it is for Afghanistan reconstruction. That's what SIGAR is. By an independent inspector general of the human costs of reconstruction and stabilization in Afghanistan. We're not talking the war where we took down Mullah Omar. That lasted just a few weeks. Bush was not a big deal. And let's not forget, by the way, that after 9/11, Mullah Omar, who was the leader of the Taliban in Afghanistan, which was the government of Afghanistan, Afghanistan was at that point in time the second poorest country in the world behind Burkina Faso. Their annual gross domestic product, the total sum of all economic activity in the country of Afghanistan was $2 billion a year. $2 billion a year. So Mullah Omar came out after 9/11, and you can find this in the Washington Post. It's where I read it. And he said, and this is back in the day, 2001, November 2001, or maybe late September of 2001. And he said, if you guys, he's speaking to George W. Bush and Dick Cheney, said, if you guys have any evidence at all that Osama bin Laden was actually behind this, he's here in Afghanistan, along with about 5,000 of his merry band, I will arrest him for you. And we will turn him over to a third country. We don't want to send him to the United States. We have a bit of a problem with you guys, but we'll send him to a third country where you can have a trial like the Nuremberg trials. You can hold him on trial, you know, in pretty much any third country you want. We'll work with Europe to make this happen. And we're prepared to do it. We're prepared to arrest him right now. And George W. Bush and Dick Cheney said, oh, no. We want a war. Wars are what gets presidents reelected in 2004. I mean, we're looking forward here. Joyce, I don't know if you can put my 360 up here, but thank you. You'll recall Cindy Sheehan, whose son Casey was killed in Iraq after George W. Bush lied us into the war in Iraq, testified before Congress, before John Conyers' commission. And she said this.
As a matter of fact, in interviews in 1999 with respected journalists and longtime Bush family friend Mickey Herskowitz, then Governor George Bush stated, "One of the keys to being seen as a great leader is to be seen as commander-in-chief. My father had all this political capital built up when he drove the Iraqis out of Kuwait, and he wasted it. If I have a chance to invade, if I had that much capital, I'm not going to waste it. I'm going to get everything passed that I want to get passed, and I'm going to have a successful presidency," end quote.
So George W. Bush lied to us. This was the year before he ran for president. He was telling the guy who was writing A Charge to Keep, his autobiography, who was his ghostwriter, he was saying, if I become president, I'm going to invade Iraq, because when my daddy did it, he was only there for 3 days, and he did not get enough political capital to get himself reelected. He lost to Bill Clinton in '92. I'm going to get myself reelected. And the first opportunity they had was not Iraq, it was Afghanistan, because 9/11, and that's where bin Laden was. So we invaded Afghanistan, and we're still there, 20 years later. Or what is it, 19 years later, I guess. So the Special Inspector General for Afghanistan Reconstruction, SIGAR, they sent out this press release this morning. This report is believed to be the first official counting by an independent inspector general the human costs of reconstruction and stabilization in Afghanistan, the number of people killed, wounded, or kidnapped while doing these activities. And when they say people, by and large, they're talking about Americans. Key points. Using multiple casualty-related sources, SIGAR conservatively identifies 5,135 casualties in Afghanistan associated with reconstruction or stabilization missions from 2000 through December 31st, 2018. Again, these are not casualties associated with war. These are not, the casualties associated with war are much greater than that. These are not casualties associated with war. These are casualties associated with trying to rebuild a country that we broke so that George W. Bush and Dick Cheney could get a second term in office. And if you think that Donald Trump is not thinking about this right now, who is he going to go to war with just in time for the election? Think again. But anyhow, back to SIGAR. The total reconstruction-related casualties include 2,214 killed, 2,921 wounded. The report also identifies 1,182 individuals who were kidnapped or went missing. During this period, at least 284 Americans were killed in Afghanistan while performing reconstruction or stabilization missions. This includes 216 U.S. service members and 68 U.S. civilians, government employees, contractors, and those with unknown status. An additional 240, I said earlier it was Americans, apparently it's Americans and Afghans as well. An additional 245 U.S. service members and 76 U.S. civilians were wounded. 100 other coalition service members were killed and 105 wounded. Another 124 third country nationals were killed, 87 wounded, 59 kidnapped. 1,578 Afghans were killed, 2,246 wounded, 1,004 kidnapped. These included 1,447 Afghan civilians killed, 2,008 wounded, 1,003 kidnapped. Of the Afghans killed, 65 were bystanders. Now just think if your brother or sister or son or daughter or mother or father was one of these people who went to Afghanistan to try to help rebuild the country, who was kidnapped or killed or wounded and permanently scarred. Data collected by SIGAR shows that the majority of casualties occurred during the height of the reconstruction efforts between 2008 and 2011. There were 818 casualties related to security activities. This is around reconstruction. 346 killed, 472 wounded. This was the most dangerous activity for Americans. Of the 346 people killed while performing security-related activities, 195 were Americans, including. There were 257 casualties related to 154 U.S. service members and 41 U.S. civilians. This category included casualties and kidnappings that occurred while providing health and education services to local communities, providing food aid, supporting displaced populations, and other activities aimed at alleviating the suffering of the Afghan people. SIGAR concludes that unless the U.S. government considers the human costs, the true costs of reconstruction and stabilization efforts in Afghanistan are not accurately captured. Let that sink in. And listen one more time to Cindy Sheehan.
As a matter of fact, in interviews in 1999 with respected journalists and longtime Bush family friend Mickey Herskowitz, then Governor George Bush stated, "One of the keys to being seen as a great leader is to be seen as commander-in-chief. My father had all this political capital built up when he drove the Iraqis out of Kuwait, and he wasted it. If I have a chance to invade, if I had that much capital, I'm not going to waste it. I'm going to get everything passed that I want to get passed, and I'm going to have a successful presidency," end quote.
And she goes on to say, it looks like my son Casey's fate was sealed before he even joined the military. He joined the Army, I believe it was, as a result of 9/11. It's time for us to get the hell out of Afghanistan and Iraq. It's, among other things, and other places, excuse me. Pardon me. We'll be back. I'll pick up your phone calls after this. There's an awful lot on the table, stuff that we've talked about today. I also want to just give you a heads up on the one guy in the Trump administration who I think actually has something useful to say every now and then. And Peter Navarro, I'll tell you about that right after the break, too. It's 16 minutes past the hour.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Taking back the mainstream media 3 hours a day, 5 days a week, right here. Thank you for joining us. We'll be right back. And welcome back. Gail in Antelope, California. Hey, Gail, what's up?
Hey, I've got some good news for you. This will make your day feel better.
Okay.
I wanted to talk to you about health care. Because we're discussing Medicare for all now. I mean, that's a big issue in the election this year is health care.
Right.
So I wanted to just kind of give you an example of what I have, which I think is a great model. I retired from a major utility company that was union represented, so I've always had health care for my entire working career. Anyway, when I turned 65, obviously I had to go on Medicare, that you have to do, which was okay at that time. I still had the company kicking in, and I think I paid $130 a month or something for my health care coverage. So when it came up to Medicare, back to that. When I was in there, I had Kaiser. That was my medical provider, whom I've always had. So when I went to Medicare, I was concerned that I was going to lose Kaiser. So anyway, they have what they call a Senior Advantage program.
Right.
So I went on a Medicare Advantage with Kaiser, which is a non-for-profit health care provider. Okay? There's a big difference.
Yes.
So basically, six years ago, the company switched from the traditional type of thing, and they gave us, the retirees, all what they call a health care reimbursement account. So every January, they deposit $2,700 into that account. It's tax-free to me. I pay no taxes on it. It can be used for any type of health care. It could be medical, dental, vision, prescription drugs, even over-the-counter drugs if you want to. So you pay for it, they reimburse you for your costs. It can be used for premiums, it can be used for copays, anything that pertains to your health care. My premium for Kaiser is $24 a month. That is reimbursed automatically to me from the health care account.
Yeah, that's great.
Medicare is $144.50. That's reimbursed automatically. Nothing per month for premiums.
Right.
Any copays, reimbursed.
So it sounds. Hang on just a second, Gail. If you're paying for Medicare, you don't have a Medicare Advantage plan. You have a Medigap plan that fills in that 20% hole for Medicare, right?
They call it Senior Advantage. I don't know what it is.
Right.
But anyway, whatever, because they deduct that out of your Social Security. It went to $144.50 this year. But basically, I pay nothing. I pay nothing out of pocket for my health.
That is marvelous. Congratulations, and that's the advantage of having a decent employer. The problem is that most of America doesn't. But Gail, thank you for the call and for sharing that. Tommy in Alpine, Texas. Oh, there we go. Tommy in Alpine, Texas.
Okay.
What's up, Tommy?
Hey, thanks for taking my call. Thank you very much.
Get your mouth within inches of the microphone, Tommy, or I'm going to put you on hold.
Here we go. Right, here we go.
Yeah, what's up?
Oh, yeah. Hey, look, I'm just curious about the strategy of the 4 prosecutors that resigned in protest for Bill Barr trying to get Roger Stone's sentence lowered.
Right.
I mean, where's their courage? I don't understand. Like, how dare they stand down?
Well, the other shoe has not yet fallen or dropped or whatever the old cliche is, Tommy. Judge Amy Berman Jackson, who Donald Trump was trash talking on Twitter last night, has the final say. The DOJ can come in and say, we recommend 9 years, or they can come in and say, we recommend a week. The judge gets to make the decision. And she's seriously pissed off at Roger Stone for the way he's been behaving. So I wouldn't be at all surprised if she throws the book at him. And that, I believe, is scheduled for February 20th. So, this isn't over. It was the old Yogi Berra-ism. It ain't over till it's over. We'll be right back. Our free Hartmann Report podcast recaps the show every day. It's available wherever you find great podcasts. Hey, my new book, The Hidden History of the War on Voting, Who Stole Your Vote and How to Get It Back, is arriving in bookstores on February 10th. More information is available at all fine bookstores. I cover how the heartbeat of democracy depends on the vote. This book goes into depth on the racist legacy of our vote and the unique struggles of African Americans, women, and Native Americans. In part 2, there's a deep dive into the economic royalist modern war on voting. And part 3 is the solution section, how to get out there and get active. I'm also on the road to the book tour for The Hidden History of Voting. Join me on Monday, February 17th in San Francisco for the Berkeley Arts and Letters series, on Wednesday, February 19th at Town Hall, Seattle, Sunday, February 23rd for the Blue State Ball in Minneapolis, Friday, February 28th at Powell's in Portland, and Sunday, March 1st in Chicago. More information is available at thomhartmann.com. This book is the third in the series after The Hidden History of Guns and the Second Amendment and The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America. Well, welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And is it Stephen or Stephan in Mentor, Ohio?
Yeah, either or.
Okay, it's spelled like Stephan, but I have a brother who spells his name that way. So anyhow, what's up?
Listen, Tom, I have 3 points. One was that Gretchen in California was speaking with you earlier about the health care and how it's perceived in Nevada with those folks, being afraid that...
Right. Let me just reboot this real quickly, Stephen, and then we can continue the conversation for people who weren't listening back then, because the audience turns over a lot throughout the day. People are getting in and out of their cars and things. She called up and she said, and in fact, she said to Mark Pocan, she said that there are flyers being passed out, apparently by one of the unions or two of the union members anyway, in Nevada.
The culinary
workers union, right? The people who work who handle the food and stuff in the casinos and restaurants. That they negotiated a really, really nice health insurance program, and which is probably costs the employer $15,000, $20,000 per year per employee. And this flyer says if Bernie gets in and he does Medicare for all, you're going to lose that fancy schmancy program. And Pocan's point and my point was, Cool.
Yeah.
If you get full health care, which includes dental and vision and no copays and no deductibles and drugs and everything, which is what Medicare for All does, then your employer now has $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 that they can spend toward your retirement fund instead. It's opening up money for other benefits that the union can negotiate for. So this whole thing that union members are going to be worried about Medicare for All is complete BS. Anyhow, back to you.
Yeah. Point number 2, defining socialism. I think, Bernie ought to get on the air and, try to explain that our military is a social program, that our schools are a social program. Our
These are socialist programs. Yes, absolutely. Our fire departments, our police departments, our public parks are,
libraries, parks.
Right. People say America's not a socialist nation. Nonsense. We've got lots of socialism. In fact, just ask any Republican. When Franklin Roosevelt rolled out Social Security, they said that's socialism. When LBJ rolled out Medicare and Medicaid, that's socialism. When FDR rolled out long-term unemployment insurance, that's socialism. And they're right. These programs are a form of socialism. They are ways of providing for the needs of society. Spot on, Stephen. Thank you very much. Bill in Clifton, New Jersey. Hey, Bill, what's up?
Hey, how you doing? I'd say when it comes to Roger Stone, it ain't over until he gets pardoned.
Yeah, well, there's that too.
That's the ultimate, right? Anyway, and I like the quote you said before. I'd say in terms of health that we're not a nation of money, we're a nation of morals. And no one makes the moral point of view that people are dying because of our system.
Yes.
But to get to the point, no one talks about regionalism anymore.
You're talking foreign policy?
Foreign policy, that each area, like the African states and the Union of Arabic States, they all have their own forms of NATO, and they should be policing their own areas regionally.
Yes, this used to be called spheres of influence.
Right. And there's no reason why we over here should have to be policing over there. We have 11 aircraft carriers. That's $2 billion apiece. No other country has more than 2. China doesn't have more than 2.
Russia has 1, as I recall.
Okay. I don't remember when the last dogfight occurred. Maybe it was Vietnam, but I don't see why we need those giant ships with maybe a few hundred aircraft on it when you can have a quarter the size one with a bunch of drones on it.
Yeah.
But anyway, because we've become the policemen in the world, and we are policing all the waterways and everything, it's costing us too much money, and these areas should be policing themselves and report to the UN as one united body instead of us, handling the whole world.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, Bill, and that's why the UN was created, and why the world was largely divided up. It's still an imperialistic worldview, the whole spheres of influence thing. England or the European countries have their sphere of influence, and we have our sphere of influence, and all these poorer, smaller, and mostly minority countries, they're within the sphere of influence. We need to examine all of this stuff, but we've just ignored the entire thing.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Time to get out of Afghanistan and Iraq and a few other places as well. We'll be back. Our book today is How to Get Rid of a President by David Priess. And this is from the chapter Rejected by the Party, starting on page 12, kind of mid-chapter. Presidents need not be thrown out at the polls on election day to find themselves dislodged from the White House. History shows us that a chief executive's own political allies can remove that incumbent when they perceive him as unpopular or unfit. Refusing to nominate a president for a second term, or better yet, getting the incumbent to realize that he should walk away before it becomes an embarrassing vote at the convention, does bring the party significant pain. But many politicians have calculated that discarding their own party's toxic president by internal action is better than waiting for the voters to do it. This dynamic remained absent for the first half century or so of American politics. George Washington, who didn't represent any formal party, set a precedent by stepping away from re-election after 2 terms. Successor after successor followed suit, keeping the support of their parties until they left office after 8 years. Jefferson, Madison, Monroe, and Jackson lost the next election, both Adamses and Van Buren, or met the Grim Reaper, Harrison. John Tyler, if only in this one respect, was a trendsetter. He began a 6-president cascade of men who failed to appear on their party's ballot in the general election after their first term. One, Zachary Taylor, literally had no choice. Like Harrison, he died in office. The others, by staying alive through their 4-year terms, could have carried their party's banners again on Election Day. Not one did, as national agonizing over slavery and other tensions within each of the major parties made it difficult for any president to build and sustain a governing coalition. Of those 5 chief executives, only James Polk left with a solid reputation and a ledger of successes. He'd told Democrats upon his nomination in 1844, "I shall enter upon the discharge of the high and solemn duties of the office with the settled purpose of not being a candidate for re-election." And he stayed true to his word. It was just as well, only 3 months after what would have been his second inauguration, he died at the age of 53. The 3 presidents who followed Polk, the forgettable series of Millard Fillmore, Franklin Pierce, and James Buchanan, shared 3 characteristics. First, historians routinely rank them among the nation's worst presidents. Second, and related to that, they took no responsibility for resolving the national moral failure of slavery. And third, no matter how they had attained office, they, like future presidents Chester Arthur and Lyndon Johnson, found themselves spurned by their own parties. The Whigs had learned in 1840 that a celebrity candidate seemed to have an easier route into the White House than a party regular. So in 1848, they nominated General Zachary Taylor, a recent hero of battlefields in the Mexican-American War. Despite his lack of solid political principles or any apparent passion for the job, just 2 years earlier he'd said with apparent sincerity, "I am not and never shall be an aspirant for that honor," Taylor won the election over Democratic candidate Lewis Cass. In July 1850, he became the second straight Whig general to president who couldn't make it to the next election alive. Vice President Millard Fillmore took his place. Fillmore had risen to prominence in New York's anti-Mason party dedicated to exposing and opposing Freemason fraternal organizations, but switched allegiance to the Whigs in the 1830s. In the first year and a half of the administration, inter-party rivals had manipulated Taylor better than Fillmore did, leaving him little to do but preside over the Senate and stew over his fate in a useless job. But as president, he was prepared to avenge perceived slights. Ahead of their expected dismissal, all the cabinet members whom Fillard had inherited from Taylor offered their resignations, which were quickly accepted by the new president. He asked them to remain in place for 1 month. They agreed to stay for 1 week. Fillmore would proceed to fire more previous political appointees than any of his successors had. More than half of those at the State Department, for example, had to find new jobs. The biggest development during Fillmore's presidency was the Compromise of 1850. This set of bills admitted California to the Union as a free state, allowed the organization of the Utah and New Mexico territories without reference to slavery, resolved both the Texas state boundary and the Lone Star State's remaining debt, abolished the slave trade in the District of Columbia, and reaffirmed the fugitive slave law that required the returning of slaves escaped across state lines. Fillmore signed each bill, believing this package of measures had fixed what he considered an annoying issue that kept getting in the way of his other priorities. The compromise bills delayed a war between the states, but at a cost. They not only perpetuated slavery, but split the Whigs further apart, as most Northerners refused to abide by the fugitive slave law. Congressional elections in November 1850 increased the Democratic opposition's majorities in both the House and the Senate. The rest of the president's term was so bad that the highlight might have been the start of Commodore Matthew Perry's voyage to Japan to open that country to American trade, even though he didn't arrive until Fillmore left office. Not long after rising to become the chief executive, Fillmore declared he wouldn't run again in the 1852 election. He reiterated that in 1851, but the trappings of presidential power and the pleas of his remaining party faithful convinced him to retract that pledge and make a late entry into the field of candidates. He portrayed his about face as a noble personal sacrifice for the good of the party and the country. And during the spring of that election year, 8 Whig state conventions endorsed him. As delegates gathered for what a leading historian of the era calls the longest, most rancorous, and most debilitating Whig National Convention ever to meet, the first tally had Fillmore in the lead. How to Get Rid of a President. Hey, my new book, The Hidden History of the War on Voting, Who Stole Your Vote and How to Get It Back, is arriving in bookstores on February 10th. More information is available at all fine bookstores. I cover how the heartbeat of democracy depends on the vote. This book goes into depth on the racist legacy of our vote and the unique struggles of African Americans, women, and Native Americans. In part 2, there's a deep dive into the economic royalist modern war on voting. And part 3 is the solution section, how to get out there and get active. I'm also on the road to the book tour for The Hidden History of Voting. Join me on Monday, February 17th in San Francisco for the Berkeley Arts and Letters series, on Wednesday, February 19th at Town Hall, Seattle, Sunday, February 23rd for the Blue State Ball in Minneapolis, Friday, February 28th at Powell's in Portland, and Sunday, March 1st in Chicago. More information is available at thomhartmann.com. This book is the third in the series after The Hidden History of Guns and the Second Amendment and The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America. Chicago. So I mentioned in the previous half hour that I was going to mention Peter Navarro very briefly. It'll just take a second, and then I'll get back to your phone calls here. But in my opinion, Peter Navarro has been on this program. It's been a lot of years, but we have talked in the past. He's a very smart guy, and he understands international trade. The one thing that Donald Trump, he hasn't done it right, because he's been doing it by executive order rather than getting Congress on board. Probably because he wouldn't be able to get Congress on board, because the Republicans love free trade and hate protectionism. I mean, keep in mind, NAFTA was negotiated by Reagan and Bush. Bill Clinton gets all the blame for it because he was president, but it really was a Reagan-Bush initiative. And Republicans have been loyal to this idea ever since, and it's been the Democrats, people like Sherrod Brown and Bernie Sanders, who have been fighting the World Trade Organization, NAFTA, permanent normal trade relations, these expedited fast-track deals, all this stuff. It's been the Democratic Party that's been fighting this. And so, of course, Trump grabbed that because it was very popular. Just like, in a State of the Union address, he said, "Don't worry, I'm going to protect Social Security and Medicare," lying through his teeth. Well, in this case, he actually tried to do something about the trade problem with China. It's just that he did it ineffectively. He did it like, scattershot. But anyhow, Peter Navarro makes a really important point to the Financial Times. This is actually an article by James Polity in today's Financial Times. And the headline is, U.S. Trade Advisor Seeks to Replace Chinese Drug Supplies. The problem is, with this virus crisis that they're having in China right now, people aren't going to work. The Foxconn factory where they make Apple products, only 10% of their workforce showed up yesterday, or the day before, whichever was the first day that everybody was supposed to come back. People are afraid. And virtually all of the generic drugs sold in the United States now are manufactured, or at least the raw materials for them are manufactured in China. Many of them are pressed into pills in India, but many of them come directly from China. And there is a concern in the halls of the White House right now, or the halls of, there should be a concern right across, all parties through our entire government, that if China shuts down, that we might run out of drugs in a matter of weeks or months. And so Peter Navarro comes out and he says, this is a wake-up call for an issue that has been latent for many years, but is critical to U.S. economic and national security. We cannot necessarily depend on other countries, even close allies, to supply us with needed items from face masks to vaccines. And of course, pharmaceuticals. And, one of my rare tips of the hat to somebody in the Trump administration, but, he's the exception that proves the rule, I guess. Anyhow, Todd in Rockford, Illinois. Hey, Todd, thanks for listening to Sirius XM. What's up?
Hey, Tom, thanks for taking my call. No Trump here.
Okay.
Just wanted to ask you a quick question. I've heard that an incumbent president will always get reelected if the economy is good. Is that true?
I don't think that always is true, but I think usually is true. I'd have to go back. I've seen the charts and the graphs and stuff, and of course there's other things, other variables that go into it. The other but it is considered a truism. In other words, it's almost always the case. Another truism is that when a country's at war, they reelect the president. And that's the one that Donald Trump was pointing out in 2012 when Barack Obama was running for reelection. And 4 different times over the course of that year, Donald Trump tweeted that any minute now Barack Obama is going to start a war with Iran because that will get him reelected. And so we know how Donald Trump thinks in this regard. Those two things are the general truisms, and of course that's why he's ragging on Jay, the head of our Federal Reserve. Brain fart. Anyhow, that's why he's ragging on the chair of our Federal Reserve to lower interest rates, because he wants to goose the economy even more. And in my opinion, that's why he keeps dancing us up to the edge of war with Iran, because he wants that in his back pocket if it looks like he's going to start losing. I'm fully expecting an October surprise of that kind. Thanks a lot for the call, Todd. Angel in Chicago. Hey, Angel, what's up? Thanks for listening to WCPT.
Thank you, Tom. I was hoping you could tell me a bit about what the Magnitsky Act is and what we're doing about it.
Wow. Magnitsky was a guy who was killed by the Russians, and therefore the act was named after him. And, I think I know, Angel, but I am not certain, and I would rather not give you any information than give you misinformation or wrong information. I've done that more than once in my life and always regretted it. So, there have been some very good descriptions of the Magnitsky Act a year or two ago, mostly on Rachel Maddow's program, and I've read a fair amount about it, but I don't want to get anything wrong. So, but basically it has to do with sanctions, sanctions on Russia for, some of their misbehavior. And that's, by the way, I believe the thing that the Russians were trying.
Not money laundering?
I think it has to do with. I think it absolutely has to do with money laundering, and that's one of the things that the Russians were trying to get repealed in some of their meeting with Don Jr., for example, because their response to the Magnitsky Act was to ban American adoption of Russian orphans. But beyond that, if they start getting into the weeds on it, I'll probably get something wrong, so I'd rather not do it. But Angel, thank you. It's a great question.
Sure. No
I'm sorry
problem.
I don't have a facile answer for you. Shirley in South Boston, Virginia. Hey, Shirley, what's up?
Hey, Tom. Thank you so much for taking my call.
My pleasure. By the way,
if
I may interrupt you just for a second, Shirley, because I saw Boston there, it just reminded me. Earlier I said that John Adams and Sam Adams were not related. They were actually second cousins, and a whole bunch of people corrected me on Twitter. Thank you for that. Now, back to you, Shirley. My apologies.
Okay, I am in South Boston, Virginia.
Yeah, I know, but it's just the Boston reminded me.
Okay, I heard you say a while back that atonement is needed, and that is the truth. Yes. Because only the Almighty Creator can help us now.
Well,
we as a people,
we still have some agency, Shirley. We still have the ability to act.
We as a people, all people, we need to repent, worship, and trust the Almighty Creator. And I am so glad Nancy Pelosi is praying for Trump.
Yes.
I shout hallelujah to that.
Well, I have prayed for Trump. I think that anybody who prays needs to be praying. Jesus said, pray for your enemies. We have to.
Pray, I pray for everybody.
Yeah.
Because we need prayer, persistent prayer, truthful prayer.
I agree.
Because this world needs to come to the knowledge of who the Almighty Creator is.
I am with you, Shirley, and I think that's very well said. Thank you very much. Joan in Port Orange, Florida. Hey, Joan, what's up?
Hey, Tom. Thank you. Thank you for being the voice of reason.
You're welcome.
Thank you for your calm. What we have, and if we go back to the beginning, Trump was trying to be as ridiculous as he could to get Hillary elected. Something went terribly wrong. He's in there. He has done everything, including stupid little things to say, please get me out of here. Illegal stuff. And yes, he's got illegal stuff in his background, for sure. for him to point out, for all of us to have eyes wide open, impeachment did nothing. For us to say, oh, he's Teflon Don. No, he is showing the American people, your government you think has power? Nothing is farther than the truth. Laws mean nothing, as they say. And then you say, well, wait a minute. They're trying to tell us to wait until it's time to vote, that the voting would have power. His daughter's in China getting voting machines. How can you trust this?
Right. We need to be calling our senators right now, 202-224-3121. Call both of your senators and say, this is it. He's gone over the top. You have to stop him, especially call your Republican senators.
What do we do in regards to if we asked for a paper ballot and therefore we delayed because they're going to have to count each one by hand? There won't be any computers that ballot up or
there's no easy or slick way to throw sand in the gears of this machine, Joan. I'm sorry, but it ain't going to happen. Joan, thank you for the call, though. Alan in Crown Point, Indiana. Hey, Alan, Medicare for All?
Yeah, hey, Tom. According to the Urban Institute, the proposed Sanders health care is going to be $3.4 trillion per year for the next 10 years.
Right. You know what we're paying right now?
What are we paying right now?
4.6.
Okay. Well, according to the Urban Institute, that 3.4 is more than we pay for the Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security.
That's true. And so is 4.6 trillion.
Pardon me?
And that's true, and so is 4.6 trillion. When the Koch brothers commissioned a study on this, they found that Medicare for All would cost about $35 trillion over a 10-year period, over a decade. Okay. And they also found that our current system, if nothing changed and there was no inflation, and by the way, medical inflation is going up around between 7 and 9% a year, but if there was no inflation, we're spending $45 trillion a year.
4.5 trillion?
$45 trillion a decade, 4.6 trillion a year. Yeah, it was 46 trillion. Okay. Yeah. Well, and you can look it up. I mean, I
just looked it up on Urban Institute, and that's what they said. So,
but see, when you only get the number of the cost without comparing it to what we're already paying, that's like my coming to you, Alan, and saying, you're getting ready to buy a Buick for $10,000, and I say, that's going to cost you $10,000. I'm mangling my metaphor here, but it's incomplete information. You have to understand, we are spending right now in the United States about twice as much. We're spending between $9,000 and $10,000 per person across the entire United States for health care, and 30 million of us don't have health insurance or have access to health care, and 150 million of us are underinsured. We've got copays and deductibles and drug costs that we can't handle. And if we were to, and if you look at Canada, Canada's paying around $5,000 per person per year. And everybody in Canada is covered. There's no copays. There's no deductibles. It costs you about $100 a year to have Canadian Medicare, and that's it. And it covers more things than ours does. Medicare for All saves money. You've got, just think about it. When you're running money through the federal government, like with the Medicare system right now, the overhead for Medicare is between 2 and 3%, depending on whether or not you include the value of the government buildings, right? So let's say it's 2%. If you want to cover, actual, let's say 3%. 3% is the overhead of Medicare. The overhead for-profit insurance companies is between 15 and 20%. Before Obamacare, the overhead of private for-profit insurance companies was 25 to 33%. Obamacare said you can't go above 20% if you're a small company. You can't go above 15% if you're a large company. So what happens when you get those for-profit companies, why do they have 15% overhead? Well, United Healthcare they paid Dollar Bill McGuire, their last CEO, over $1.5 billion in compensation. Stephen J. Hemsley made close to $1 billion in compensation. They're paying millions of dollars a year, billions of dollars a year in dividends to their stockholders. They're paying for marketing. They're paying for advertising. They're paying an army of people to try and deny you benefits. And then you've got every doctor's office having to have full-time people because there's all these different health insurance companies. You consolidate it into one company that has no profit motive like Medicare, we're going to save a fortune, Alan.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
We'll be right back. It's 48 minutes past the hour. And welcome back. Cherie in Boca Raton, Florida. Hey, Cherie, what's up? Am I saying your name right?
Tom. Yeah, you did. You said it perfectly. Thank you to you and your staff that keeps this well-oiled machine of sanity moving for all of us. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
You're welcome.
I just want to say that first. I'm so frustrated with what's happened now with William Barr and this whole situation in court yesterday. And I don't mean to sound obtuse, but is there some, aside from voting in November, is there anything that we can we appeal to the courts? Is there someone we could call? Is there a switchboard? Can we flood the switchboard?
Yes.
If so, to who?
Yes.
About this situation?
Get ready to write, and I'll give you the number for the switchboard. This is the switchboard.
Okay, 1 second. Wait 1 second.
Yeah, I'll explain it while you're getting your pen.
Ahead.
This is the switchboard for Congress. This gets you to the U.S. House and the U.S. Senate, and you just say, I would like to speak to my senator, and if you don't know who your senator is, or you have two of them, tell them you're in Florida. In your case, it's Marco Rubio and Rick Scott, or you can say, I'd like to speak to my member of the House of Representatives. Again, if you don't know, give me your zip code, and they'll say, oh, you're represented by Joe Blow. Okay, so the number is 202-225.
3121.
Yeah, exactly right. And you just call that number, call it once and talk to Rick Scott, and then hang up, and then call it back and talk to Marco Rubio, and then hang up and then call back and talk to your member of the House of Representatives, and make 1 point. Because the person answering the phone is probably going to be an intern or somebody real low on the totem pole, and basically they've got a spreadsheet there that says things like abortion and climate change and throw Trump out of office or whatever, and they just check a little box that says yes or no for every caller. So you've got to make your point really quick, real respectful, very simple. And thank them for taking your information. Don't try to debate them. Don't try to get in a fight with them. None of that will work. All it'll do is cause your comments to not even be recorded. And that's as far as I know, Cherie, outside of calling into talk radio shows and writing letters to the editor of the newspaper and talking to your friends and posting on Twitter and Facebook and other social media, all stuff that we all need to be doing. That's pretty much it. And call your local Democratic Party and say, how can I help?
Yes. I got you.
Okay.
Thank you so much for this. I hope everybody was listening and writing down too.
Amen.
Thank you so much, Tom.
Thanks, Cherie. Great to hear from you. Vic in Stockton, California. Hey, Vic, we got a minute to the break. What's up?
Just real quick, Tom. First, thanks for taking my call. First, let me just say that whoever said elections have consequences could not have imagined how prophetic they would be.
Yeah, that was Ronald Reagan, by the way.
Oh, God. Okay, so this is my question real quick. Given that California is the 6th largest economy in the world, and to a large degree we can pretty much sustain ourselves, how difficult would it be for California to secede from the Union, keep its social and environmental progressive policies intact, and become a model for the rest of America? And Tom, I'll take your comments off the air. Thank you.
I think, Vic, that it is not outside the realm of possibilities. The sort of thing that I'd write a novel or a short story about, that if Trump gets reelected and if he starts flipping the rest of the United States into basically, southern red state America, doing away with Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, stripping protections, stripping the rule of law, ignoring the Constitution, continuing these things. If that happens, I suspect that you would see probably a compact between California, Oregon, and Washington State to say, we're going to go our own way. And you'd probably see the same thing with a bunch of northeastern states, and maybe even, well, it's hard to say, but certainly the Northeast and the West Coast, which comprise probably more than half the population of the country. Vic, thanks for the call. It's a good question. I don't know the answer, but it's a good question. Our free Hartmann Report podcast recaps the show every day. It's available wherever you find great podcasts. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Jack in Baltimore. Hey, Jack, thanks for listening to Sirius XM. What's up?
Yeah, I just wanted to say I was listening to the show, and the lady mentioned the Magnitsky Act.
Right. And I didn't have the details.
Refer your listeners to a great TED Talk on YouTube called How I Became Putin's Worst Enemy.
Okay.
It's a 16-minute TED Talk. He did it at TED Berlin. It's a great little talk. It's 16 minutes. You'll find out all about that and really who Putin is and who his people are and what happened in Russia when the wall came down and what continues to happen today.
Cool.
If you're on YouTube, also look at Rick Steves' Fascism. He's a travel guy, but he goes through Europe.
I watched it. Louise and I watched it. Yeah, it's a history of European fascism is the full title.
Yeah. Refer to the people that issue. I'm just saying that this is what you need to do. So I just want to let you know that's a great way to educate yourself on that issue.
I'm with you. Jack, thank you very much for the call. Alan in Stuart, Florida, listening on Sirius XM. Hey, Alan, what's up?
My only question is, why can't we organize like a 10 million person march in Washington, D.C., shut the whole city down, shut Congress down, shut the Senate down until something changes? They do it in Hong Kong. Why can't we do it here?
It is that one great shocking moment. And tomorrow in our first hour, I'm going to be talking about this at some considerable length. Everybody's waiting for that one great shocking moment that's going to bring it about. In the case of Hong Kong, it was when the government of Hong Kong was contemplating a law that would allow the mainland China to basically reach into Hong Kong, grab dissidents, and transport them out of Hong Kong off to China for adjudication and imprisonment. And the people of Hong Kong said no. That was the point at which they freaked out. That great shocking moment, as far as anybody can tell, really never happened in Germany or in Italy or in Spain back in the 30s. Didn't happen in Turkey or in Egypt or in the Philippines or in Hungary or in Poland in the modern era. And whether there will be one of those shocking moments in the United States, I don't know. I mean, the election of Trump was a shocking moment. His inauguration brought out the Women's March, but. I mean, I think we're damn close, and I don't know how much more it's going to take. We are certainly living in historic times, just absolutely mind-boggling. Alan, thank you. Jim in Wheaton, Illinois. Hey, Jim, what's up?
Hey, Tom, thanks for taking my call. I have one quick question and then a point of healthcare. You often cite the statistic that we went from the largest importer of raw materials, exporter of finished goods, to the opposite under Reagan and Bush. I was wondering if you could tweet out the reference to that, if possible.
It's in my book, Screwed. It's in my book, Rebooting the American Dream. Actually, I think it's in Rebooting the American Dream.
Cool. Thank you very much. And then, so I'm all for Medicare for all. It should have happened yesterday. One thing that I don't know if anyone's addressed, and forgive me if you have, and I just missed it, but my brother-in-law he works for a health insurance company for cybersecurity for them. What do we do for when we do transition eventually to a single payer for all those people losing their jobs?
You grow the economy. There's going to be a lot more money. People are going to have a lot more money. The government will, this is going to free up a fortune. I mean, literally tens of billions of dollars a month that is being sucked out of the system by a very small handful of companies right now. And that will be a huge economic stimulus, and it's going to produce more jobs. Jim, thanks a lot for the call. And thanks for being with us today. Like I said, first hour tomorrow, we're going to talk about how other countries have gone down this road and how we're going down this road. And I think you're going to want to listen and share it with your friends. And don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. It requires you. So get out there, get active, tag your it, and tell your friends where to find progressive media. We'll see you tomorrow.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
We say fight back!